A different sound.
It's tinny.
Interesting. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Tuesday, July 18th, 2017 meeting of the City of Ann Arbor Planning Commission. Where's my usual sheet? Planning Commission meetings are typically held the first and third Tuesdays of the month, and meetings are open to the public, and participation is encouraged by all citizens. Any citizens requiring any special consideration should contact the planning department, the planning office, at least 2 days prior to the meeting, either by phone or email. Packets for the meetings are available the Friday before each meeting, and will be mailed out to those who subscribe to the Gov delivery. They also are available, packets or information is available in the lobby on the first floor of this building. We have a call to order. We'll now have a roll call.
Commissioner Ackerman.
Here.
Commissioner Briggs.
Here.
Commissioner Klein.
Here.
Commissioner Gibrando.
Here.
Commissioner Mills.
Here.
Commissioner Milstein.
Here.
Commissioner Trudeau.
Here.
Commissioner Weatherby.
Here.
Commissioner Woods.
Here.
A full house and a quorum.
Excellent. Full attendance. Next item up for us is the approval of the agenda, and I've all had a chance to take a look at it. Can I have a commissioner move that? Commissioner Mills, and seconded by Commissioner Gibrandel. Any discussion on the agenda? Seeing none, all in favor of the agenda as printed, please say yes.
Yes.
Yes, that's everybody. And our next item is introductions, and we have none listed for this evening, so we're going to go past that. And then to minutes of the previous meeting, which we also do not have tonight, so we'll go past that. And end up at reports from city administration, city council, planning manager, planning commission officers, committees, written communications and petitions. And as always, we start with city council. Commissioner Ackerman. I slipped there, didn't I?
Every time.
Excuse me, not every time, but sometimes. I apologize.
Thank you, Chair. Last night was a quick city council meeting with 2 items of note for you all. The first is that 143 Hill, the R4C property that we looked at now about a month ago, went through unanimously. The second is design guidelines. Out of the premium set that you all passed in October of 2016 have been segmented out and passed in full as regulation for downtown in response to the active use direction we got from council. That's going to regulate that the first story of downtown buildings will need to be at least 15 feet in height, 60% transparent, and designed out of high-quality materials such as cast stone, masonry, and high-quality metals, while prohibiting things like vinyl and aluminum. As our downtown changes, I think steps like this are very important to keep the character of our downtown what it is and why we all love it, despite increased density. So, thank you all for your work on that.
Thank you, Commissioner Ackerman, and on behalf of our commission here, thank you for championing those things over at council. That's great news. Planning manager, Mr. Leonard.
Sure. One other minor item that was on the council agenda last night is the street vacation of the former alley behind 3500 Washtenaw. It's the Washtenaw Commons development. You'll recall that came to you for a recommendation. That's now been wrapped up. No significant land use implications, but just wanted to tie that up as well. And then, although she's not here for an introduction, I just wanted to informally introduce Kristen Vanderlucht, who is a new administrative assistant in the planning team. We're really happy to have her, and I'm sure over the coming months and years, will be getting correspondence from her. If you ever get a chance, stop by and introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. Item 60 is written communication, or excuse me, 6C, Planning Commission officers and committees. Are any committees to report out? Commissioner Mills.
I don't have anything to report yet, but I will be back in this room tomorrow morning at 8:30 for the Allen Creek Greenway Citizens Advisory Committee meeting. That is open to the public. There's a period at the end for public comment if people are interested. I think that the agenda that I saw is that tomorrow we're kind of looking at what the package that they're pulling together, including maintenance and what the element of the master plan that will come before us will include. And I'm At this point, they're on schedule to bring something before us, certainly fall timeframe. So I'll give more details next week, after I've had a chance to figure out what they're talking about tomorrow.
Great, thank you very much for that reminder. Hopefully, we can have good participation from the community again on that. Any other news to report from commissioners or committees? No? Okay. So we'll go on to item 60, which is written communications and petitions. There are a number of things in your packet that I would direct your attention to. We won't try to go through them all right this moment, but ask that you please pay attention to them if you haven't read them already. Our next item is item 7, is audience participation. It's one of several opportunities that folks in the audience have to participate in the meetings. If you are interested in addressing the commission on any item that's not listed as a public hearing on this agenda, so it's not listed as an item under number 10 or number 9, you may come up to the podium, state your name and address us for up to 3 minutes. Is there anyone who?
Is the Spring Tower, does that have a separate public hearing?
Yes, it does. That has a public hearing, so that would not be something to talk about now. Anyone else?
Item 10, you think?
If it's on item 10, there'll be a public hearing that you'll have an opportunity to speak to at that point. Each of the items will have a public hearing. All right. Seeing no one else, we're going to move on to item 8, which are public hearings scheduled for the next business meeting.
Yeah,
Mr.
to
Leonard?
cheat a little bit, the next full planning commission meeting will be on August 1st. We do not have any new public hearings scheduled, but we anticipate, as you'll recall, that the 1140 Broadway petition was postponed a month, so that'll be returning. So at this point, that'll be the primary sole agenda item to provide plenty of time. There was a lot of discussion on that, and I thought that was appropriate. In between those, we will be having the Ordinance Revisions Committee, where we will be starting, albeit still framing it out a little bit, getting some initial feedback from the Ordinance Revisions Committee on our approach to medical marijuana in light of state legislative changes.
Okay, great, thank you. Next item for us is unfinished business, and we have 2 items. The first is Homewood Suites at 2457 South State Street for city council approval. It's a proposal to demolish an existing building on a 2.04 acre parcel and construct a new 5-story, 95,723 square foot extended stay hotel with 110 rooms. We'll start with a staff report, and then there will be a public hearing followed by commission discussion. Mr. Kowalski, you have a report for us?
Okay, thank you. Yes. Okay, here we go. Just a brief overview. If you're all familiar with the site was, South State Street at Zone C3, which is a fringe commercial zoning district. Here's an aerial photo of the site. Again, the existing building, which is known now as the Computer Medic Building, that will be demolished and obviously replaced with the planned hotel. So this proposal is before you back in early May. It is a planned project request in order to exceed the height for the C3 district. At that time, Planning Commission had several concerns with the planned project site plan. First concern was regarding the front elevation along South State Street. Additional concerns included some of the planned project justification, as well as the amount of impervious surface shown on the site plan. So since that time, the petitioner has taken those comments, as well as additional staff comments, and added some improvements to the site plan, some changes. So we'll go through those right now, and I know the petitioner is also here tonight to add detail to those as well. So the first one gives you an idea. I apologize for, this one was colored professionally, this one was me tracing. But basically what the red tracing does is outline the impervious surface. One of the questions was regarding the planned project justification, the amount of impervious surface that a standard, or that you could take up on the site versus how much is there now with the planned project and the shrinking of the footprint. So what that red outline is basically is all the impervious is either parking or hotel. You can tell the hotel is on this kind of L-shaped here on the south. The parking would ring the hotel, ring the hotel basically around here. There could be some parking along in this area. It's outside the front setback. It is in front of the building, but it's outside the required front setback, as well as parking in this area here. So this just gives you an idea of if we go back to this plan here, again, obviously one's colored a little more pretty and this one is not. It gives you an idea. I believe there's almost 10% increase in impervious surface on this plan shown here as an alternative, which granted, again, staff did not do a comprehensive review of. However, initially, the run-through for the numbers appears that it could meet our development codes. Also regarding regarding the impervious surface, on the site, the petitioner has removed two surface parking spaces that were, one was in this area here, and then the other one's kind of on the opposite of that row right there. They've also added a landscape island in here that's not actually colored green, but it could be because they were proposing plantings there. It's a mountable curb. I think they're proposing daylilies or something of that nature in there, so that could easily be driven over if the need arise. So one of the other comments was regarding the facade elevation. This was a little trickier for the petitioner to tackle. However, they did manage to add some windows to just the ground floor in this area here. So this elevation that you're seeing here was the western elevation, so this does face State Street directly. So previously, this was one large blank wall, and they did add a row of windows in this area. And they've also included some material upgrades that I will let the petitioner go into in a little bit more depth as well. Let me make sure I've covered the changes. Oh yeah, so regarding the planned project, they've also added a couple of planned project benefits. These would be things that would be over and above, obviously, the typical site plan as was proposed earlier. They're proposing to keep 4 bicycles on premise for use of the hotel guests. They also have a dedicated shuttle van for the Homewood Suites facility. And they are installing 2 electrical vehicle charging stations, which I believe are in this area right here. So there will be 2 EV stations that will be installed. There's also some discussion regarding the GO passes, but which is noted in the staff report, but one of our commissioners helpfully pointed out that the GO passes are not available that far out of the immediate downtown area. And I will let the petitioner expand on that as well. So that concludes the report, and staff is recommending approval of the plan project tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kowalski. So I will now open the public hearing on this item. If you are interested in addressing the commission, please come up to the podium, state your name and address for the record. And you may have 3 minutes unless you are the petitioner and identify yourself as such. You may have up to 5 minutes, and the leader of any organized, recognized civic group may also have up to 5 minutes if they make us aware of that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am a representative of the petitioner. My name is Andy Andre, Bud Design and Engineering, 10775 South Saginaw in Grand Blanc, Michigan. I think as Mr. Kowalski aptly pointed out, we've made some upgrades based on the discussion that we had back in early May, and I think we're coming forth with a little bit of a better project, a little bit more comprehensive with the feelings that we received from you as the Planning Commission, as well as it gave us a little bit more of an opportunity to look at the functionality of the project as a whole. Besides the additional items that we incorporated as part of the planned project, the request for the planned project, the bicycles, the dedicated shuttle, the EV charging stations. Another item that we did incorporated was solar as well. So we did include solar panels on the top of the elevator shaft as well. So that'll be one of those items that we talked about that will help to supplement. So we've incorporated overall, just to kind of regroup as the entire project, we are proposing a vegetative roof. Now we're talking about solar. And I can tell you from the evaluation that we did as an alternative analysis, the additional alternative analysis that we provided with the latest submission, it was close to 10%, an additional 10%. So we could come in and not ask for a planned project and have 10% additional impervious. That's not something that I think that would fit characteristically for this area. We talked a lot about at the last Planning Commission meeting, this project being an impetus for redevelopment with the things that are going on across the street with the university, gateway into the city from this portion. So I think the commitment is there to take what we did before and we've enhanced it. And so what we've come tonight is to reiterate that commitment. and some of the additional things that we've done. If I could touch real quickly, we did talk a lot about the public transportation aspect of it. And we did, again, speak with transportation, with the traffic engineer about the mid-street crossing, okay? We said we would do it, and we did it. And again, based on the configuration, the location, this location is not a good candidate for that mid-street crossing. So we did evaluate that as part of our initial traffic impact study. We did re-explore that again, and I think it's a great idea. It's just not at this location. But what we did talk about is the commitment for the applicant with some form of public transportation. So what we had talked about is somehow promoting public transportation with the staff. I think with what we're proposing, ride sharing, that type of thing, if the transit system, SMART, or we have the ability to promote that, certainly the applicant is willing to do that. And now that we're talking about, we did shrink the surface parking, so 107 rooms, 107 parking. So I think it would be wise of the applicant during the operational period to promote those types of things such as ride sharing and that. So again, appreciate the opportunity. We've taken the feedback that we received back in May. I think we've incorporated it into here, and we're very excited about the project and where it stands. Real quickly with the building, you'll see a dramatic difference. We talked a lot about the base of the building, the stone that's been incorporated, and how that acts as an anchor, and that we have a totally different feel of the building. And I think it's a good-looking building. It'll serve as a great impetus for the area and a good gateway from the southern portion of the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else like to address the commission on this item? Okay, there's no one else, then I'm going to close the public hearing for this item, and we'll read the motion, and then we'll have commission discussion. Motion reads, the Ann Arbor City Planning Commission hereby recommends that the mayor and city council approve the Homewood Suites planned project site plan, subject to preliminary plan approval by the Washtenaw County Water Resources Commissioner. Can I have someone move that? Commissioner Weatherby and Commissioner Milstein seconding. Sorry, brain's a little slow today. Commission discussion. Is there anyone who would like to lead off? Commissioner Woods.
Thank you, Commissioner Klein. I want to say that I'm glad to see the changes which the petitioner has made. I appreciate, and it's good to see that you were responsive to a number of the concerns which we had. I wanted to ask just a little bit about the electric vehicles, and maybe, I don't know if staff can just pull that up a little bit for us so we can see how, and if you could just explain a little bit about how that would work. Are you anticipating your guests may drive in with electric vehicles, or were you anticipating staff could use that, or would it be that dedicated shuttle van that would be using that?
No, I think that's a great question. I think the availability is there for anyone to use, obviously. If guests have vehicles that can be utilized by the EV charging station, that'd be great. It could be staff members as well. I happened to be in Grand Rapids this weekend, and I drove by Meyer, and I saw the charging stations. And we've driven by them. We've all driven by them. This time, there's 4 vehicles there. And so I think increasingly, as people become aware not only of the location of them, but the availability of them, you start to generate, people have the vehicles, and you start to see it. So I think the intent there is that it's open. It's there for the guest use, could be for employees' use, and so on. So I don't think there's any limitations that we were talking about with those.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other commissioner questions, discussion? Commissioner Mills.
Thank you very much. I have a question about the bike sharing that's available for the guests. I think that's fantastic. I'm wondering what your plan is in terms of parking the bikes. I'm imagining that you're going to be using some of the hoops that you're using, so I was just curious what your plan was.
Right, exactly. So, yeah, that's a very good question. So what we do is we already have as part of the site plan, we're already incorporating outdoor bicycle parking as part of that. What we did is we have a room, there's a storage room, we actually identified it on the plan, room 138, that will be able to adequately store those bikes for the use. So they're there, they'll be available, and, they'll be there for the guest use.
That's great, and you didn't know this question was coming, but that's the right answer. I was thinking, the room inside, the storage room,
Yes.
Guests aren't gonna know about it, visitors. There's another, you won't be the only hotel in town that offers bikes for guests. I have been to one of those hotels, and I can't find a place to park my bike because they use the hoops that are in the front. And so I appreciate, I would just encourage you to make sure that your guests know that this is amenity, because I think it really is. You're in a highly cyclable place.
Yeah.
So I think I'm in favor of that. I think that is a benefit.
Yeah, I think it's one of those items that you promote, and at a check-in, you say, and we have availability for parking. And we talked a little bit about this at the last meeting of why we have outdoor space too in the back portion of it, because of the extended stay, because people are looking for something other than, I'm just in my hotel room. The designs of hotels now are morphing a little bit into pushing people out of the rooms rather than keeping them in the rooms. Rooms are actually getting smaller. And because of that, because of pushing people out into the community areas, the larger areas, the gathering spaces. And so that's why we do have that. And that's why the brand recognizes that and incorporates that as part of the base design. We have the outdoor space. We have the athletic court. Again, we learn a lot from our experiences. I was in Grand Rapids. I happened to be staying at a hotel. There's an athletic court, and I thought, well, it was nonstop. It was nonstop. People were playing basketball. There was volleyball out there. It was nonstop. I was a little surprised. I really was. But I think that's what some people are looking for. And so the amenities, being able to offer and making sure that the guests know that this is for your use, that's very important.
My only other question, and I think I know the answer to it, but the bank of windows that you've added on the
Yes.
west elevation, the large bank, what's that looking into?
Right,
Or
so
in
that's into, identified on the floor plan as the general manager's office, sales office. So the fitness center, so the fitness center is along the western portion. So now, rather than having this large monolithic, large expansive area, we've now broken it up with a more storefront design. One of the things that was looked at, and I think the designer was in communications with Matt about this, it was explored to add more windows along that western front. However, the brand would not go for it because of having, if you're a guest in that room, having two windows on those corners is a little bit more invasive than they were willing to do. So we tried to maximize it out, at least on the first floor.
Got it. So there should be activity going on behind those windows? Is that what I'm, based on what's,
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. General manager's office, sales office, fitness center,
okay,
all of that, so.
got it. Great, thanks. I don't have any more questions.
Great. Anyone else? Since you're up here, I just want to follow up on the window question.
Sure.
And, first of all, appreciate adding some glazing. I think my comments were some of those that requested that. It is a little disappointing that the brand wouldn't
Right.
see fit to add some windows up higher, but I do think that it makes a big difference putting the large expansive glass on the first level. And I think for most people, that, that's about how tall we are. We recognize that a lot more than windows way up high anyway. But, so the glass that's going in there, it is vision glass. It's not I've seen before glazing go in and it's basically spandrel or painted glass, but we are talking
No,
about
I
vision
don't
glass.
think that would be the case, because, I think, and I envision it as showing activity. You want to show activity, you want to have that, and so,
That's what I would think, but
I
I
would
just,
too.
I have
Yep.
to ask.
absolutely.
So I do appreciate also the other, the sustainable initiatives you're taking. as you've come back here, the bikes, the shuttle, the charging stations, some solar panels on the vegetative green roof. I mean, it's, none of this is not a, net zero project. But I think it starts to show that a fairly typical, and let's face it, the developer kind of driven hotel project can
Yes,
still
it is.
have a shade of green that, and hopefully this can help set an example for others that come to town, that we can point to Homewood Suites and say, look what they
Absolutely.
did, and see if they can do you one better. I also think that the proposal, the request for about 15 extra feet and a floor on here in this location fits in with the South State Street corridor
Yes.
plan, long-term goals to create some greater density and on this major arterial out of town and create more of an entry. So I think for that reason, I'm supportive of the petition. Commissioner Milstein.
This is a question for staff. Do we have any idea why the traffic engineer does not see a reason to install a crosswalk there? The nearest crosswalk to get across to the athletic facilities there is at Oak Brook and State, which is, I just can't see someone walking all the way over there. So does staff have any comments as to what this
I
traffic
had a
engineer?
feeling I was going to ask. I don't specifically, the petitioner, maybe, I did have conversations with her. There's a merit reason, there's a long list of reasons why. I can tell you that, sorry, I can't go into specifics, but it wasn't just a simple, it's just going to close the road down for a couple of days or something. It was a longer question of planning initiatives and as well as traffic flows in and out of that area. Let me try to track movements, turning movements and things like that. But I'm sorry, I can't give you more specific. Did you talk directly with Cynthia as well? Because I spoke.
Our traffic engineer did.
Yeah.
And what I can do is I can kind of summarize. Again, I'm not a traffic engineer per se,
Yeah.
but I think you touched on a lot of points. What it comes down to is actually pedestrian safety. And at this location, where the turning movements are, when we have mid-block crossings, it tends to be at a point where acceleration and deceleration, you're having a conflict at this location. And so what it really boils down to is it's pedestrian safety. This location, not that at some point in the future, and I do believe as part of the future planning of this corridor, there is a mid-block crossing that has
There is
been
one
discussed.
planned,
There is
correct.
one planned. This is not the location, though. So at some point, as part of South State Street, it will be installed. It is planned, but this location doesn't really fit the siting requirements necessary in order to do that.
And Commissioner, I could just add that I know it doesn't resolve it affirmatively. That was my understanding as well, that as part of the South State planning effort, there were some preferred locations that just didn't happen to be adjacent to this. I don't know all the reasons probably for some of those safety factors, but should the Planning Commission proceed with this, we can make sure that that's addressed in more detail before it goes to Planning or to City Council, so that it's clear why that conclusion was made.
And that's the one thing, just a comment. I'm really worried about that just because I work a block from here and I see people crossing right now. It's dangerous. So before it does go to City Council, I would like the traffic engineer to comment and prepare a report for City Council. So if the staff can make sure that that's accomplished, just so they can review it and make sure it's the right thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Gibrandal.
I have a couple of questions about the landscaping. If you could, in our packet, we don't have an accurate west elevation. So perhaps if Mr. Kowalski could bring that up, because we don't see the additional windows in our paper packet. There we go. So what I'm wondering is, it seems that for me, I think we're all a little disappointed that the brand wasn't open to putting more windows in that upper area. So one of the ways that I feel like you might be able to mitigate for that is if you massage the location of some of your canopy trees. Right now, the majority of them are kind of in front of where your windows are, and perhaps if there's a little bit of scooting around, that they might be able to articulate some of those blank faces in front of the big mass that's closest to State Street, where we have the vast expanses of brick. And so perhaps there just might be a way to try to soften those big blank zones, which I think a lot of us are kind of reacting to, that's part of what we're reacting to, are those big blank zones. And so it's not any more trees or anything like that, but perhaps, there might be a way. It's never going to reach it's never going to compete with your sign up at the top because it's too tall. Those trees are never going to get that tall. And it just might be a way to soften that elevation, since we didn't get any give from the brand, to be able to make that feel a little more broken up.
Sure. No, I don't think there's any objection to looking at the landscaping in front of there, now kind of in the context of having the additional windows and maybe trying to promote that view a little bit more. So that'd be fine.
Good comment. It seems like that they've got a whole bunch of trees bunched up right there, and they might be
Right.
able to,
Yeah.
Right.
I think
very
we can
little
look at,
effort,
we
be
can look
able
at
to
spacing.
get a little.
I do know we do meet the requirements of the landscaping from the street tree perspective and the planting requirements that are there. So, but I don't think there's anything to say that we could
Can't
look
move
at the
them, right.
spacing a little bit more and a little bit more contextual with the building. Maybe, like I said, a little bit more holistic when it comes to integrating the landscaping with now what our building's gonna look like.
Yeah.
So that'd be fine.
Okay, so that, I would suggest that's something when you, assuming you get passed by this body, when you go to council, highlight that for the city
Sure,
council.
absolutely. Yep. Yeah, I'll have the landscape architect look at that. Thank you.
You might even be able to actually do an elevation that shows the intersection of the vegetation with the front of the building.
exactly what I was
It's
saying. I was
viewed
actually-
from
I was-
State Street,
I
could
was
really help
thinking
illustrate that point, so.
Highlighting because the rest of the building is the rest of the building. We know that,
Right.
we've talked about that extensively. I do think it's a very good-looking building, but the characteristic is of the west elevation. And so I already envisioned maybe looking at an enlarged west elevation with the landscaping projected to kind
Yeah.
of give it, again, contextually, how does the landscaping work with the building itself? So I think we have the tools that are here.
Yeah.
I think it's just now kind of rearranging them in the parts that make it a little bit more aesthetic.
Other discussion, questions? Okay, so, looks like we're ready to vote. All in favor of the motion as read, please raise your right hand and say yes.
Yes.
Yes, that is unanimous, so it passes.
Thank you very much. I really
Good luck
appreciate
at
it.
city council.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so we're on to our next item, which is item 9B, the Sprint Temporary Cellular Facility for City Planning Commission approval. It's a proposed temporary cellular tower trailer to be located at 214 East Madison Street for a 3-month period from August 28th, 2017 to November 28th, 2017. And Mr. Kowalski, you're going to give us a staff report.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Okay, you can see the subject property here. It's zone D2. It's also known as, it's part of the Fingerly lumber site. You can see it kind of highlighted in the blue on your site here. Oh, the aerial is to the left. There you can see. It's got a little bit difficult to see, but there's a lot of long linear buildings kind of on the site, which obviously are used to be storing lumber and whatnot. The temporary facility, or COW as we may be calling it interchangeably, it's basically a cell on wheels will be located in the south east corner of it. So here you kind of have a zoom-in version of that, this corner of South 5th and Hill Street. So again, this is a facility that many of you on the committee have seen several times before, this same type of facility around. We get these requests usually during the football season. Obviously, there's a large number of people within the city, a large number of people using cell phone service. So the service providers get overloaded. So we've had these requests come in over the last couple of years as these booster towers kind of come in. Literally a cell on wheel, they're going to wheel it in there. And it's mounted to boost the service. I mean, this affects everybody from emergency responders as well as to just the average citizen texting back and forth at the game. So these are temporary facilities. It does not require a site plan, however, because it's not a structure. They're not constructing anything that is not additional floor area, nothing that triggers a site plan. They will, however, need to pull building permits. Obviously, it will be inspected, approved. through the building permit for any electrical connections, anything of that nature, as well as structural security to make sure that the facility doesn't move. One item of note, again, that it is located within the floodway along that area. We've had extensive conversations with our floodplain coordinator. He's conversed quite a bit with the applicant back and forth to make sure that the structure is about as flood-proof and stable as you can get there. They will not have, there will not be a fence around the building. From what I understand is they are going to secure it at the base so that obviously nobody can mess with it in any way like that. The maximum extension will be 55 feet. So it's slightly less than the maximum height in the D2 district. Again, this is, I believe it will be left up through the length of the football season. After that time, it will be removed. They will also need to have a zoning compliance permit. That's something that's issued through the city. They'll come in, submit, that will be done in conjunction with the building permit in question. Process of it. All this will be reviewed as well as floodplain implications, all that at the building permit stage. The zoning permit would be good for 180 days. They've been satisfied that that's more than enough. I mean, in the past, we haven't had any issues with people leaving them up any longer than they have to be. Typically, the last game, they're down the next day. Let's just make sure I covered everything. Again, the key nature is the temporary use. If it comes back another year, they will need the a zoning compliance permit as well. So there are some comments, again, in your packet, particularly from the floodplain coordinator. While he wasn't, obviously this is not the ideal location for something located in the floodway, being of a temporary nature. He did note that in his comments. So again, at this time, planning staff is recommending approval of the temporary wireless communications tower. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kowalski. So I'll open the public hearing on this item. If there's anyone who would like to address the commission, please step up to the podium, state your name and address for the record.
Good evening, everybody. Wally Haley on behalf of Sprint. And that is correct. We have worked back and forth with the floodplain coordinator to minimize any effect in the floodplain. At this point in time, if you looked at the disruption in the floodplain, it'd be equivalent to 2 milk crates of water displacement. So we worked pretty hard to make sure that everybody was pretty satisfied with that plan. The report also called out another concern by the flood coordinator, having the structural revised so that his concerns over flotation. If you had some huge flood, that this thing wouldn't float away. We actually had our structural engineer address that and submitted a revised structure to these guys yesterday.
We looked at that this morning, actually.
Yeah, and so it probably hasn't even made it in
It's
there,
part
but the
of the
condition that they were requesting, we fulfilled it and made sure that they had it. And the actual weight of the equipment far outweighs any of the structural issues of flotation or anything like that they talked about, and that's put into a signed and sealed structural letter. I do want to address one thing, and I'm going to take a little bit of issue with something Matt said. And he said people would be texting at the game and stuff because of this temporary cell tower. This tower is not designed to cover the football stadium, all right? The misnomer on the cows is, these are put in for capacity concerns, right? And the reality of it is people who go to games, people who go to, like I go to the hockey game, I don't expect the phone service in there like I get when I'm out. What the cows do provide, though, is coverage to first responders, existing Sprint users who live here, businesses who live here, and all of the other people who are used to working, their phones working and providing the service that they're paying for. On Saturdays, they don't get that service because there's just too many people in the area because of the football stadium that sucks all the capacity out of that system. So the fact that, that there's some impression that this is going to be used by people in the game sitting there, doing their thing, that's not true. There's just too many people, no way to cover it inside like that. This is to provide relief in that area for the neighborhoods and the businesses and things like that. So I did want to clear that up as to what really the purpose of this thing is. Yes, there is a football game going on. No, there is no capacity because of all the people there, but it's designed to cover that specific area and continue to provide coverage in that area for those people, like first responders and phone users and existing customers who get the same coverage Monday through Friday and Sunday in the fall. So I did want to clear that up. One other thing, too, I just want to make sure everybody's aware of is that it will not operate other than on Saturdays. It's not being put in to, be through the fall. It's going to be in there. The mast will be up for technical reasons and engineering reasons that they can't keep testing it because they'd have to start putting the generator back on during the week to retest it every time they wanted to refocus it. So the generator will run on Saturday, and the cow will be operational on Saturday. And it's only between the hours of, I believe it's 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. or something like that. And so I did want to clear that up. Let's see. That's pretty much it. You've got some folks that have some concerns, or probably from the neighborhood. I'd be more than happy after they're done to address any concerns that they may have that they bring up, and any concerns that the commission has. So I'll yield my time.
Thank you. Anyone else like to address the commission on this item?
Probably will steal your sign-in sheet.
Oh, please don't do that yet.
Good evening. I'm Beverly Strassman. I live at 545 South Fifth Avenue. That's very close to where this proposed cow would be put, the cell phone tower. And I'm the president of the Germantown Neighborhood Association south of Packard. So does that give me 5 minutes?
Yes, it does.
Okay, great. So I would like to begin by reading the note that is in your Planning and Development Services staff report. It says, while it may be technically feasible to approve and permit the proposed cow, for anybody listening on the outside, that's this proposed Sprint cell phone tower. While it may be technically feasible to approve and permit the proposed tower within the floodway, from a floodplain management perspective, it is not desirable to locate these facilities within the floodway. Staff strongly discourages the petitioner, that it would be Sprint, from further such proposals and recommends that future cow proposals be located outside of regulated floodplains, especially the floodway. This is a quote from your own staff report. So as a citizen and a representative of the neighborhood community that is immediately adjacent, we are really quite shocked that this is even being considered. The Sprint representative who just spoke with you spoke about a couple of milk crates of water. I mean, just Google, which I did about an hour ago, and I emailed you a photo of the water that floods the entire Fingerly area. There's water like 2 feet deep, and it covers the entire Fingerly floodplain and especially collects in this floodway, which is exactly where the petitioner is proposing to put this tower. So I really don't understand how a self-respecting planning commission would be able to look citizens in the eye and saying, yeah, we're saying that this really shouldn't be done, especially not in the future, but we're going to let this one slip by. Okay, that just really doesn't hold water, so to speak, if I make a bad pun. We're also concerned about the diesel noise and fumes. We don't want to take the petitioner's word for it as to when and exactly when this will start and when it will be turned off. There's nothing obligating him to adhere to what he just said verbally before you. We have neighbors elsewhere in Ann Arbor who have been stuck with one of these Sprint cell phone towers, and they've been very concerned about black smoke, fumes. These things are diesel. Okay, they're running off generators, as I understand it. These things should really be properly located, permanent structures that can run off the power grid so that they're not these sort of massively hostile to the environment diesel enterprises. And we think that there's the social justice issue that you, as the Planning Commission, are targeting what you perceive as the less wealthy, less deserving, less organized, less white neighborhoods for these undesirable structures. So what this will trigger is a review of really what's going on with the Planning Commission in Ann Arbor and your policies as far as where you're citing these sort of facilities. You have an easy out on this one. It's in the floodway, as I just mentioned. Okay, then, the contract is allowing it to be up for 6 months, but the title said that it's just for certain dates that comprise 3 months. So this was very deceptive for citizens who read, oh, there's this agenda item, cell phone tower Sprint, up for 3 months, taken down November 28th. But then when you read the staff report, this tower can be actually up for 6 months. So it's totally at the discretion of Sprint to decide when they actually take this thing down. So that's an incompatibility that's really not okay. You know, the title and what you say you're doing and what's in the staff report, we're not even talking fine print, they need to cohere and coincide. There's just no way this can be passed until that happens. If you want it for 6 months, then please put that in the title and be upfront about it. This Sprint cell phone tower is incompatible with the surrounding neighborhood. We are homes.
Thank
Is that
you.
my
That's
5
that's
minutes?
5 minutes, yes.
Okay. And we never heard from Sprint, by the way. He says he's here for us to talk to us, but we never heard from him.
Anyone else like to address the commission on this item? Please.
Hi, good evening. My name is Claudius Vincenz. I live on 545 South Fifth Avenue, just up the hill from the proposed site. And yeah, when I first saw this note, I thought, yeah, it was just a temporary little tower that goes up and gets carted away after it's done. But it's definitely misrepresented. This was just pointed out in the fine print. It can be up for 6 months. And what the people who propose this project don't like to talk about and don't have any specifics on are this diesel generator. What kind of specifics is it? How much fumes does it generate? What noise does it generate? I doubt the diesel it runs on fits in the 2 milk crates that supposedly this whole site occupies. What is there done to prevent the diesel fuel to spill into the floodplain? As you know, the floodplain is connected to the river, so it's not a minor issue here. And so it's fumes, noise, environmental damage that this can cause, and none of that is addressed in the proposal. And since this is a highly profitable enterprise, putting in an electric line would just be the least that could be done. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Richard Jacobson, 538 South Fifth Avenue, also half a block up the hill from Madison, and close to where this tower is going to be put in. The problem I have with it is that I hear happy talk from the Sprint representative about hours it'll be running only during the games, only 8 Saturdays or whatever it is per year. But when you look at the actual legal allowance that they're given to run this thing, it will be 6 months of continuous diesel running is what they're allowing in the proposal that is going to be voted on here tonight. And if we really are doing something just to give topping capacity for the games, that should be in the proposal rather than giving them 6 months of running of this diesel engine in my neighborhood. 24/7 legally. And so if that's not what you want to do, if you want to actually hold these individuals to what they're telling you here tonight, which is much less than that, I would recommend that you not approve this as it's written, but write that language that he was speaking about here into the proposal so that we have some sort of protection legally from the city council. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else like to address the commission on this item? Okay, seeing no one, I'm going to close the public hearing, and I'll read the commission motion, then we'll have commission discussion. The proposed motion reads, "The Ann Arbor City Planning Commission finds the petition to substantially meet the standards contained in Chapter 55, zoning ordinance, Section 5:8(2), wireless communication facilities, and therefore approves the temporary telecommunications facility cell on wheels at 214 East Madison Street for a monopole designed without the ability to co-locate additional antenna subject to approval by the building department." Can I have someone move this in a second? Yes, I'm sorry. Commissioner Briggs. I am slow today. And you switched sides on me, too. Anyone else? Commissioner Mills, seconding. Commission discussion. Commissioner Woods.
Thank you, Chair Klein. Just a couple of questions, and perhaps the petitioner might want to come forward. I took down some notes as you were speaking, and I want to make sure I have this correct. You indicated that this tower does not cover the football stadium. It covers the other people outside of the stadium, since those in the stadium are basically sucking the capacity.
No, everybody, it's not, there are so many people in the area, people walking to the games and things like that. You would never get capacity to that neighborhood at that point in time. It's not designed, this tower is not designed to be covering inside that football stadium. Okay?
So so then if it's not designed to cover within the football stadium, why does it have to be located close to the football stadium? I guess I'm not clear on what you're saying.
Sure. Let me try to do it by example. Football stadium,
Yeah,
neighborhood, right? Like these folks. And you've got existing capacity in this area.
right,
Sunday.
okay.
Let's say it's Sunday. And so we've got existing capacity in this area, and then all of a sudden on Saturday, I have 100,000 people walking around, driving around, doing things totally independent of being inside this football stadium. I lose all my existing capacity to provide coverage to, people walking around, but even at that, emergency responders in the area, the residents in the area who've paid for coverage in that area, you know, as part of their plan as using it on a daily basis. So, yes, I'm not going to kid you, the tower is going to cover people coming in and out of the stadium and traveling in that area, but it's also going to cover people who are in that residence, in that area, doing the business and doing the things on a Saturday of the people who are not going to that game.
Okay. So this is a Sprint tower, so is it covering people who have AT&T
No.
and all the other ones? So are you saying then that of those 100,000 people who are now coming to this area, what percentage of them have Sprint?
I don't know. I absolutely do not know. I'll be the
So
first-
it could be, or those who live in the area. You don't have any idea of those
I
customers?
don't have the statistics.
So
I
we're
really don't.
sort of putting this tower there for an unknown number of people, except for the fact, of course,
Well,
we would know about our emergency responders and how many of those would be there, but I'm just
Sprint-
trying to get a sense, because it sounds like we're trying to help you correct a problem which Sprint might have during those times, but I'd like to get an idea as to what that problem is, because the problem that we're trying to solve is not coming without consequences, hence that's why the neighbors are here.
I can appreciate that. The Sprint's residents in that area I do not know the answer to how many phones and people that live in that neighborhood have Sprint phones. I'm not privy to that. However, their radio frequency engineers see all that data and everything, and they wouldn't do something this costly if they didn't find that they were doing the things that they wanted to do with providing that coverage for those people. I mean, it's not simple for us to stand here and do this. You know, they're clearly, despite the happy talk that this gentleman accused me of, they are agreeing to limit this thing to solve the problem during those very specific timeframes. You look at the application that our office did for Sprint. I mean, we're not here for 6 months. We asked for this thing from August 28th to November 28th. That's it, 90 days. We have no problem with you folks conditioning, you know, that for that 90 days. We have no problem with you conditioning it on Saturday from the hours that planning, the staff report says. We're not gonna run that diesel generator 7 days a week, 24 hours a day during that 90 days. It's just not gonna happen, and we understand that part of it, and that's their agreement that they're willing to do.
So it sounds like you're saying that if, for example, we decide to make an amendment and limit this to those specific dates, Sprint would have no problem turning it off so that it's not indeed 6 months. Is that what you're saying?
We have no problem with that.
Okay.
Yeah, that was, in fact, if you look at the specific application we filled out was for that 90 days.
My other question is, what are your competitors doing? If Sprint is asking for a tower there, what's AT&T doing? What are the other folks that are your competitors doing for their coverage?
I can't speak specifically to them. I do know, you know, anecdotally, that they have applied with the city for temporary facilities in the past. I don't know what they're doing this year. We're not privy to their plans. We're here independent of that, and our application stands on our merit for our customers.
Okay, all right. Thank you. I then have a question for staff, I think. So this isn't the first time we've seen a cow come before us. A couple of years ago, maybe, or last year. Was that for Sprint, or was that for a different company?
I'm not sure if, I didn't work
believe it
on
was
one
Sprint.
last year, but I know we've had one come through. Sounds like Commissioner Mills, you know the
Okay,
answer.
looks like Commissioner Mills.
Commissioner Mills, would you like to?
There's a map.
I printed it out because I remembered kind of discussing this. It was 2 years ago when it was Sprint.
It was Sprint, okay.
And
And
it's-
so we had a location then, I believe, was also in the 4th Ward.
Yes, and I know we've had some, I personally have dealt with 2 Verizon towers that were done a couple years, maybe it's 4 or 5 years now. I believe AT&T came through with one. They still exist, but that was a couple of years ago
Okay,
as well. They're all located in the general.
in that
City.
area. Because I was wondering if Sprint got one 2 years ago, what happened with that location?
I'm not
Uh,
sure.
mm.
I don't know.
Would you by any chance know about it?
I do know about it from, the fact is that at that point in time, I believe it was discussed with staff, kind of like very similar to what the admonition is in the tail end of the staff report too, about, you know, let's not, you know, we understand you got, there's very few places to go. You pick the floodplain place. You've made steps to be minimally intrusive, but we'd really prefer you don't come back there. And if I recall, I believe that there was something similar to that to one of the other locations in the past. And Matt may know that better than I do.
I'm going to ask if maybe we can pull up some of those minutes or see what the specific issue was in that location, because I think having seen the pictures or the picture that was forwarded to us of showing that location on the Fingerly lumber site, and the fact that we know that there is, from time to time, standing water that's there, I think that raises a lot of concern, particularly, at least I'm concerned about it, and probably my fellow commissioners are as well. So I don't want you to necessarily feel like we're picking on you, but certainly, this is an item which doesn't go before city council. This item gets decided by the commission. And I think it's just incumbent upon us to be able to go out and to talk to our neighbors about why we felt that it was important to do that. And so I'll yield my time now, but I think I do have some more questions, but I'll see if someone else does, Chair.
Mr. Chair, may I address
Oh.
one of Mrs. Wood's,
Wood.
Ms. Wood's comment?
Go ahead.
Thank you. The concept of moving from one place to another, I've been doing this for 20 years, all right? And one of the things that we always find is that cell towers equal people who are going to be upset regardless of where I put this, okay? So if I move this to another location, which at this point in time, there wasn't any, folks in my office, you know, worked really hard to, and then working finally with the Fingerly Lumber people to do that. But if let's say there was another location, okay, it's still gonna be close to residential, all right? You're still gonna send notices out, and you're still gonna end up with citizens who wanna voice their opinion, and that's just the nature of that business. It wouldn't matter if I was trying to build a permanent facility somewhere in that area, like someone suggested. I'm still gonna end up with those people who are gonna come in and wanna talk about it, all right? As to the floodplain issue, all right? If there is standing water there, I can appreciate that, but the reality of it is this facility is not gonna impact that floodplain either there or not there. You're gonna still have standing water. If you have standing water during a rain, you're gonna have standing water there again. This facility is not gonna impact that at all because of the minimal intrusion that it is. So the floodplain thing, it's not gonna affect that. As to their concerns about the diesel generator, the diesel generator runs on a diesel engine, no different than a diesel car or a diesel truck driving by. You know, it's not some big thing like powering a hospital. It's a temporary, you know, diesel generator on a trailer that is run by a very small diesel engine. So you're not going to be putting a diesel out like you would if the hospital went down, where they have banks of, 50-yard, generators. It's not that. It's a temporary facility, a temporary generator, and it's going to run for 8 hours on Saturday, not during the whole time it's installed. So.
Thank you. I think you've gone beyond it, responding to.
If you don't mind my just saying, perhaps one of the ways you might solve this, since it seems like it's going to be a perennial problem, is to indeed talk to the University of Michigan and see about installing a cell phone tower on the top of the stadium, which would be above the flood zone, and everyone in the stadium, as well as those in the surrounding area, would then have the power which everyone needs. Sometimes we look for an easy or easier path, but you have to understand that the fact that it's going to be a perennial problem means that our citizens are going to be perennially feel like they're being put upon, and that may not necessarily be worth it, I guess, is what I'm saying. And I guess I'll pass because I'm starting to get a little agitated.
And
Anyway.
just for your information, AT&T does have cell towers on the stadium and has agreed at their cost. I don't know any details of it, but with the university to put them there. So
Okay.
I'm not sure how many companies talk to the university about that, but I do know that they are up there on the stadium.
Yeah, thank you.
Commissioner Briggs.
Yes. So I have a few questions and concerns. First, it sounds like that there's no concern from the petitioner to write in sort of the parameters, legal, parameters of usage. And so if we move forward with this, I would think that would be smart for us to do. I'm curious with regards to the issue of providing service for first responders, since this is just Sprint service. Do we actually know if this is an issue for our first responders in terms of the service they need, or is that just kind of being brought about because it's hard to turn down service for first responders? And then finally, my biggest concern really is just the, and this is a question maybe for you, Matt, with regards to what the floodplain coordinator said. It seems like there's a pretty strong message that this is not a desirable location, and yet we're, as planning staff, we're, suggesting that we should move ahead. And so I'm kind of curious about why there is that big discrepancy internally, in terms of,
Sure,
That's it.
I think, as you stated, it's technically feasible, it could meet the codes and regulations. I think the nature of it being a truly temporary, the amount of time that it'll be in there, the 3 months, the amount of fill, there's no fill as such. I mean, it's, again, here's a pretty good, I don't know if this is the exact one, this is my coworker that, Chris Shang had put this in there, so I'm not sure if this is the exact style, but get a nature of it. I think that the truly minimal nature of it, and that we haven't had, we have had these things for many years now going back. We haven't had any issues with them staying around, with them either being vandalized. I know that's not necessarily the concern here, it's the floating aspect of it. But between the temporary nature of it, between it being able, they will have to, when this comes in for building permits, they're going to have to make sure that, I mean, Jerry, our floodplain coordinator, will be looking at this and ensuring that this is not going, it's anchored properly and everything else like that. So I think that that's part of the justification, is mostly, again, being the truly temporary nature of this, and being able to secure it properly.
I guess, given that, it's still surprising then to me that there's this fairly strong statement, because it seems like it is worded in a way that says, well, technically, staff strongly discourages this. I mean, which is.
So you may
Yeah,
add additional comments?
a couple, I just want to jump in. This is a great example about, I think you wrestle with this from a planning commission perspective at times. There's sometimes that you want to realize something from a desire, but if we are also bound by code to do so. And so I think that's reflected in these comments. We do have the technical ability to achieve this installation at this location from a very specific, and I don't want to say narrow, because it has wide-ranging benefits, but ideally, even though it's technically possible, it's not recommended based on his comment. Why we're bringing this recommendation to you is based on all of the feedback that we've heard, and trying to respond to this petition. To be clear, we don't go out and identify the location and say, Sprint, you should put it here. We have to respond to that and try to balance all of those things. Ultimately, though, if we don't find that it's appropriate, that's certainly Planning Commission's perspective as well. To the question about some of the other ones that we've issued, previously we've also issued a approval for 910 Green. That one also included restrictions that it was only to be used on home games, that its operation on those home games would be no more than 4 hours prior to the game and no more than 2 hours after the game. So that is a precedent for sort of a time restriction. And then we have previously also, the city has approved a cell on wheels at 400 East Stadium. The only condition on that one was that it would be limited to no more than 80 feet. So that gives you a sense of some of the past actions by the city.
Thank you, Mr. Leonard. Commissioner Weatherby, then Commissioner Milstein.
I just wanted to follow up, because I think I just wanted to stress one of the things that you said that was important for me to hear, which is basically this meets our code. And so while it's not perhaps what we think would be best in our community from a floodplain perspective, we legally permit this right now. And so that's an important aspect in terms of how we vote for things.
That is a key distinction, absolutely. Commissioner Weatherby?
So, I have had one of these near my house for the last 2 years. And thanks to the work of the Planning Commission for those last 2 years, it was very workable. The 4 hours ahead, 2 hours after, I think the first home game is the 9th. The setting it up right after that, they took it down the day after, that was the last home game. They did abide by all the regulations. The generator was not particularly loud. In this particular situation, I think Fingerly's parks a lot of very large vehicles during football games. Their generators are going to be far louder. So I'm not trying to take necessarily Sprint's side, but I think that it was not as much of an issue as we had worried about, and there was a lot of worry about it. And they did everything they said they were going to do, and it didn't end up being problematic. I think for me, and maybe staff can tell, exactly where is it going to be in this? I see the square here, but what concerns me is that the bus parks right on the corner of Hill and Fifth with a lot of very inebriated people who are up high on top of a bus. And is it right there? Because I'm worried that people are gonna try to, in a way that it wasn't in a neighborhood. I worry that there might be a little more activity around this one than maybe in the backyard of a neighborhood, which is where it's been before.
They did, from the report, it does say that it'll be set back about 20.7 feet from Hill Street and 31.4 feet from Fifth.
Right.
So that's about as much, I mean, and within that area also has to be identified on their zoning compliance permit. Like I said, no site plans required, but when they come with zoning compliance permit, they need to measure that area out as well and delineate exactly where that's going.
Right. So I think what worries me here is that the other use of that area, interesting. So that the other use of that area, which is not gonna require any sort of zoning, and maybe Fingerly's isn't going to park the bus there, and I know that's not under our, but that's just an issue that's been a long time corner of shenanigans. And I think that we just need to be careful that, before it was in the backyard of a resident, right next to a residence, those residents didn't, it was 10 feet from another residence. And the nice thing about this here is that it's not right up close to residents, which is nice, but I just worry that in this particular location, with the particular crowd of people, that you might have some issues, or that there might be, let's take down the goalposts kind of thing, or that there, so that's a concern that I have.
More of a security, safety issue.
From a security, safety issue. The other thing with the water there that worries me, these are not very, if it's raining, the water will go right underneath them. What does worry me is there is a lot of swirling water in that area potentially. And just to make sure that it doesn't tip or fall would be my concern on that, less so than that it impacts the floodway. I do know also we have had people in our neighborhood, which is right adjacent, who, it's not so much the first responders from the city that have problems. People can't call 911 on their phones. And we did have a neighbor who got caught in their house, unable to call 911 because their phone didn't connect. And I assume that's more of the first responding issue than, and who had to pound on their window until a passerby came to their aid. So I do think that capacity in these areas is problematic during football games, and unfortunately, we don't have a great algorithm for exactly how much capacity should be in a particular place, but I know that has been an issue in those neighborhoods there. So those are just my comments, and I think, like I said, they were very amenable to the very specific timing, and I think we should add that in.
And then just so you know, 2 years ago at least, when we approved it, we did add the specific timing into it. Commissioner Milstein, were you, and then Commissioner Hackman?
Thank you. So I remember this from 2015, because this went back and forth, and it was a late night meeting, because we had a full agenda back then. Similar to tonight, but much later. So one of the things that, so it was very controversial last time around. It wasn't that we just passed it. We had a lot of discussion, a lot of good discussion about timing, and when and where and how, and when it would come up, when it would come down. But one of the pieces that was really important at that time was that this was going to be in a location it was on Green Street, and this was also Sprint at that time. It was going to be on Green Street in a fenced-off area that's all very vegetated, that would not be visible as you're walking by. And that's one of the things that I noted the year that, or the 2 years that it was there, that I would walk by and I wouldn't notice, other than I knew it was there, so I would see it. If you're driving by, down Hoover, you might see a tower up, but it was kind of out of the way. No one from the sidewalk would ever notice that it's operating there. And it was actually fairly quiet. It wasn't that it was making a lot of noise. So that's the one thing that I really liked about the Green location. This location is party central. You have a ton of open space all around you there with Fingerly. Even if Fingerly shuts down their operation and says, hey, no more tailgating on our parking lot, you still have the rest of that area that's heavily populated by students who I would say are probably sometimes intoxicated. And this is a fun thing to do, to climb up this thing that's right there, that's not fully fenced around like the previous property was. So I'm more concerned about that and safety of everyone else that's there, that's gonna be walking by it, because it will be up during those, the most dangerous times of the year. The other thing to note is that I'm not gonna say I remember this word for word, and someone who was on the commission with me at that time, we were told that they really just needed this for 1 year and that they had a permanent location lined up for it. That there was gonna be, this was one last year for us to do this. So I don't remember that for sure. Commissioner Mills, I think, has more of the exact log of what happened there. But this is an every year sort of thing. Obviously AT&T and some other networks have figured it out. I don't know the business, so I'm not gonna get involved in that. But moving it every year to a different location, and for this to keep coming back, it's a problem. So, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Ackerman?
Thank you very much. Just on the 100, well, first of all, I think only planning commissions in Ann Arbor, Michigan can talk about the bus with inebriated people on top, and everyone knows exactly what you're talking about. So, thank you, Commissioner Weatherby. But in terms of the 180 days or the 6 months, I just want to clarify that zoning permits last that long. So even the ones that were installed in previous years that had more restricted windows of operation and then lifespans would have been permitted for 180 days also. With that said, is there a way that we can memorialize the restrictions that we're talking about in their operations, should this move forward?
Yes, absolutely. As conditions of the approval, you could include them right in the language, and then that would be encumbered upon any future zoning compliance.
Good. So I imagine that would be friendly to the body if we formalized hours of operation, not saying that I support this one way or another, but should it move forward, I think getting those safeguards in place is good. I guess, to ask the petitioner, what were you having what was your, what's your perspective on hours of operation for the Saturdays of home games?
I think your past one of 4 hours before and 2 hours after.
Any home football game?
Yeah,
Okay.
on a home game, it's fine.
Yep. Okay.
It's not unreasonable at all.
Can I move that amendment, that 4 hours ahead and 2 hours behind any home game?
It'd be added to the proposed, and for the time period, I'm assuming between August 28th and November 28th, 2017.
I don't know the home football schedule, but
The first home game is the 9th?
Their request in here was for the 20th to the 20th. That's what I was basing it on.
Just to be clear, I think the intention is to limit, just as you said, the zoning compliance permit is typically for a longer period of time, so the tower will be physically located there for potentially a longer period of time. But my understanding is the condition that you're moving towards is to restrict operation of the cellular tower for only home football game days, those specific days.
Yep.
And furthermore, on those days, no more than a period of time beginning 4 hours before the game and extending to a period 2 hours after the game.
exactly.
So That's a motion. Is there a second for that, Commissioner Mills? Discussion on the proposed amendments. Okay, so I'm going to ask for a vote on the proposed amendment.
Who seconded?
Commissioner Mills. All in favor of the amendment as proposed, please say yes.
Yes.
Yes. Any opposed? Okay, so now we have a revised motion. Thank
Awesome.
you.
I got a couple other ones. On the perspective of the public safety, I think that's been raised a couple times, and I think that's completely legitimate. Has fencing been discussed? Has fencing around the unit been discussed?
We were originally going to put it, oh, I'm sorry.
Please, yeah, use the microphone, please.
I'm sorry. We were originally going to put a perimeter fence around the facility, and to be honest, the floodplain coordinator had an issue with the fence. We have talked we don't want to leave this thing unfenced, so they are designing a way of fencing it from the trailer itself without being a part of the affecting any of the floodplain. So when they put it up, they are going to fence it from the trailer, not from a larger around the perimeter.
Yeah, I imagine a fence is good to protect your investment as well as.
Yes. From the bus.
Okay, I can appreciate that. And finally, it's been raised a couple times as well as finding a permanent solution. I appreciate Commissioner Wood's statement about this being a perennial issue, and perennial issues should probably find permanent solutions. Has Sprint been in discussions with the University of Michigan, or I guess any party, about finding a permanent location for a cell tower?
I know every carrier at some point has been in a discussion with the University of Michigan. I'm not privy to the whys and wherefores, or why some did and some didn't. I suspect it's probably not paying the money that somebody was trying to exact. The other thing, too, that I think may ultimately, and you're going to be inundated with this as a planning commission sometime down the road, is the rise of small cells. I don't know how much you've had to address or be involved with any of those yet, and maybe not at all. But you're going to find that the carriers, to fill in capacity spots, will be doing a lot more what we'll call small cell or DAS, where there is multiple small poles, 40 feet, 50, utility poles, street light kind of things that will hopefully alleviate these kind of capacity concerns that, from a more pinpointed direction. Our office is seeing a lot of preliminary work now in this area. I can't speak to it as it applies to this particular application. I don't know what Sprint's going to do relative to small cell. I do know they are involved in small cell at this point in time. So as the direction of the industry goes for the filling in these capacity sites and capacity areas that there's problems, they're going to do, that is their intended direction, and that's pretty much across the board from all of the carriers. And we don't just represent Sprint. So.
Thanks. I think my final thoughts are, this does sit squarely within the floodplain, and putting detached structures in the floodplain makes me uncomfortable. And without any assurances of there being a permanent solution moving forward, I'm a little bit uncomfortable supporting this. That's not to say I don't see the merit of it as a Sprint customer myself. But I'll leave it at that and let my colleagues continue the discussion.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other questions, Commissioner Mills?
So the benefit of going towards the end is that a lot of the things on my list have been checked off, but I'll let you guys know what things I was concerned about. One is the fencing. I think that's really true, and what continues to concern me, I agree with you, Commissioner Ackerman, about detached structures in the floodplain. I'm more concerned with what you brought up, Commissioner Weatherby, in terms of the safety. That's one of the things that our code requires, is that it not cause a public or private nuisance, wouldn't have a detrimental health on public, or detrimental effect on public health, safety, or welfare. And I worry about the safety associated with this, especially without a fence. And I understand why it can't have a fence in the floodplain. And so that's why the floodplain is a bad place for this, generally. That could have been added to the note, maybe. I think in terms of hours of operation, the amendment that we just passed made sense. It's a little bit different than what you were talking about in terms of 8 to 6, or what you just mentioned, and so I want to make sure that we're aware of that. If we have a night game, I don't know what the schedule is, if there's a night game or not, but it could be later than 6.
Right.
And if it's an 11 a.m. game, it could well be on before 8. So it doesn't change. My understanding is our noise ordinance, which they would still have to comply with according to the times in that. But it is different, than what the petitioner stated about 8 to 6.
Yeah, and I presume that was the intent when it was arrived at the last one, because knowing that the game times can change, trying to limit the window of operation to the appropriate time, whenever that happens.
Yeah, okay. In terms of what was asked about the permanent solution, because I was on commission 2 years ago, I printed off what's listed on eTrack-It for this. If you're really curious, it's file number 15-1117.
I was curious,
So you can read along. But effectively, there was, the petitioner's representative at that time was someone called, I'm guessing, I think it's a Ms. Garrett. And she said that this is a direct quote. From the minutes at least, so you'd have to go back to the actual file. But she said she is hoping that this request will only be a one-time thing and that her permanent location will be up and running next year. Earlier, I'm glad you told me what DAS was, because I couldn't understand the comment that said, Garrett said the university does not allow towers to be located on their properties, noting that they have a DAS system in the stadium that not every carrier is on yet, but that I think that means Sprint, is working towards that. And so I think that was part of this. If Sprint isn't on my reading is maybe Sprint was planning to be on the university's DAS system then, and still hasn't been there. But she did tell us then that she was anticipating this would be a one-time thing. And it's now 2 years later, and she was hoping then. My question, a question that arises from this is to better understand the zoning compliance permit, because my understanding when we approved this 2 years ago was that it would only be for 1 year, and if it operated 2 years, I just want to understand what the zoning compliance permit is, and if Sprint wants to do this, if we approve this tonight, and they want to do it again next year, would they have to come before us again?
For zoning compliance permit, yes.
So the same.
No, not before. Well, I'll let Brett say, I didn't exactly say that in general, so I better let him speak to this one.
No. So I think the intention would be, if you are approving that this is an appropriate location with these conditions, it could return in subsequent years if it were just strictly granted. We would then, on an annual basis, require a zoning compliance permit, in which we would again make sure it's inspected, that engineered to be stable and safe. We would address any electrical connections, et cetera, as appropriate from a building perspective. And then we would again issue a new zoning compliance permit that would again say, for home games during that time with the time constraints. If there was an intention then alternatively to say, no, that's not the intent, that it seems like that might have been part of the discussion 2 years ago. Potentially it could come back. I guess my initial reaction to that is that I can appreciate the conversation about a permanent solution, but if we are finding it appropriate now, it seems difficult why the conclusion would be different next year.
And the reason, I think that it gets to the crux of the matter. From my perspective, if this is the only reasonable solution this year, in a pinch, I still don't like the potential negative impact it could have on safety of those drunk people on the very tall bus. And on the very visible corner that will always be the party central for the foreseeable future. But the note in here that talks about strongly discouraging the petitioner from future such proposals, if passing this tonight means that it won't come back to us to say, hey, you told us last time that you were still trying to find permanent solution, that's what I'll be honest, that I don't like about that. And if it's not appropriate to put on a time limit, then I have strong misgivings about voting in favor of allowing it. As you can tell, I don't love the idea of it this year, but I definitely wouldn't want to do something that allowed this for the foreseeable future, or indefinitely, effectively. So potentially a question to staff is it possible to put a term limit on, or is that something that you would, as you just said, that if it's not appropriate, then?
From my lens, you could, and then I guess my observation is when the petition came next year, with the same feedback that it technically meets code, however, it's not ideal, you'd be in the same decision point. So absolutely, you could put a time frame on it saying that it's going to be for a year. That would give them, as we've heard now again from the petitioner, that there might be some technological changes in the system going forward that might address it. I don't think it's inappropriate. I guess I just want to be realistic that if that doesn't happen as quickly as we hoped it would have 2 years ago, you might very well find yourself in the same situation.
Yeah.
Kicking the can. In a sense.
Yeah, and potentially, so the longer it's there in terms of cumulative years, the bigger the chance I kind of want to talk about the safety part of this, right? So the longer it's up, the more chance there is for someone to do something stupid, effectively. At the same point, now I'm talking pros and cons, right? If you hope for 1 year that nothing bad happens, like maybe it will prove to be not as detrimental in that particular location as it did in Julie's neighborhood. Because it was really, when we took this up last time, there was a lot of concern because it was being placed very close to homes. And there was lots of concern that this was not appropriate for a neighborhood, and it turns out that maybe that's not the case. And so I really don't know. I would appreciate other thoughts on that.
So, thank you, Commissioner. I'd like to just make sure we all know, I mean, I think it's appropriate that we consider the safety of drunken football fans. We are not personally responsible for their actions. I think we all need to be aware of that as well, that there are people who are going to drink and do stupid things, whether there's a temporary cell tower or not. So I don't want us to get fixated on that. It's not part of our charge in a sense. I mean, it's good for us to be cognizant of it, and I think asking the petitioner, regardless of which way this goes, to be willing to secure that, to hopefully prevent some fan from making it easy for some fan to hurt themselves or cause damage. But Commissioner Woods?
I was just curious, and perhaps this is for the petitioner or for staff, when you have something like this, and if it's not fenced in or something, do you have any kind of security that sort of tries to make its presence known so that, I mean, I know we're not responsible for those students necessarily, but they are our residents, at least for when they're here. So indeed, we are responsible for them. So do you all ever have any kind of security, like you might make sure that they sort of were patrolling or around the area, or I don't know, your signage, like do not touch because you're going to get 5,000 volts of electricity.
They're not going to get that, but it's my understanding that when the cow is operational, which is that time frame, that time limit we're talking about, is that that Sprint or one of its contractors will be there as like a cell technician during that period. So I believe there is actually someone there to shoot kind of thing. But they are planning on putting a structure around this trailer to make it, so that it's not easy access. Even though we got rid of the fence, I do want to stress that we have clearly indicated that we're going to put something on that trailer, design it so that trailer is going to be fenced in from at least making a barrier to people trying to climb or doing anything like that. you know, if you put a perimeter fence out there for 4 feet, you know, someone can jump that. It's probably actually better to prevent something on being on the trailer and being higher up than that way. The other thing too is, and I do absolutely appreciate those concerns about attractive nuisance and partiers and things like that. But I will tell you that the vast majority of these cow deployments are at festivals. You know, they're at areas where, you know, there's some reason that they've got to do this. You know, out in this particular case, it's to provide coverage. Thinking of the concert out in the woods on west side of the state, I can't, the name of it, Enchanted Forest, I think it's called, or something like that. You know, the carriers put cows out there for that, because there's no cell coverage out there as a matter of course. So, you know, the carriers in general are pretty used to putting these things in an area of crowds, and oftentimes partying crowds and things like that. So they are acutely aware of trying to make sure that outside involvement with that facility is you know, non-existent. So.
Thank you. So I want to make a couple of comments. One is just to clarify, I think it was said earlier by Mr. Leonard, but when we, the commission and the city, the commission reads the motion and it's written in the affirmative, that is not a statement that the commission is endorsing or putting forward for this petitioner or any other petitioner. It is the way we write motions. For clarity's sake, they're always written in the affirmative to avoid double negatives and more confusion. Likewise, while the planning commission staff may speak with a petitioner about advising them on what they think might work better in the community or wouldn't work as well, the staff of the city is not asking them to go to any particular property, or as far as I know, avoid a specific property. I would guess that they might have suggested staying away from neighborhoods is a good idea, because like the residents that have come out tonight, people are concerned when something like this would go up in their neighborhood, whether it's benign or not. It is a little bit of an unknown, and there's some noise with the generator, even though it's going to supposed to meet our noise ordinance for any other property. So I certainly understand that and the concerns. You know, in my opinion, like most things we deal with, there's a trade-off here. You know, providing this additional cell coverage may help the person who's on Sprint who needs to call 911, or who needs to order a pizza, depending on how serious their issue is. There is a downside to it, and certainly putting it in the floodplain is not an ideal situation, although based on the size of what we've seen in the past, I think the trucks that are parked in that parking lot on game days are probably, and the bus itself that we've been talking about, a bigger risk in terms of being carried away by floodwaters and being dangerous to people. So the fact that it is a temporary means that they don't have to do a no-rise analysis for FEMA, and they're not encumbered in that same way. I'm also, like some of my other commissioners, a little disturbed by the fact that a couple of years ago we were asked to do this for 1 year, and then it came back, and then if we approve it this year at this location, the petitioner could come back at the same location again in future years, and we're kind of not addressing it if we think this is inappropriate. Personally, I think that the context of it being industrial is an appropriate spot. To me, I think the only real serious concern that's been raised is whether it's a flood danger that we need to consider, or whether this would lead to other sort of temporary structures in the floodplain that could cumulatively cause a problem in the floodplain or floodway. The concern certainly about game goers is important, but I do believe that the petitioner and the property owner would have it in their best interest to protect that, to avoid their own personal liability. So I am a little bit torn on this one. I think primarily because if we were to approve it, then we kind of open the door for them to come back to this location next year and not get work on a more permanent location. So we have decided, we've added some language into the, we've added language into the motion to restrict the timing of when this could operate. I'm interested in hearing if other commissioners have any other discussion about the nature of approving this, or if we feel we're ready for a vote on it. I'm seeing yes, ready for a vote. Commissioner Trudeau? Is that?
Yeah, I think this brings up the fact that if we approve this, it just can come back every year after the fact, that like gives me a little bit of unease. Like that's the thing I'm the most concerned with. Now we could, if the ordinances change, then this might come back to us because the context changes. Is that right? From staff, like if we pass an ordinance related to temporary structures in the floodplain, or the city council does, that would change this permit, right? Or they wouldn't be able to, or would this permit just be grandfathered in?
Yeah, if it would have had zoning compliance under the current ordinance, as long as it continued to operate, it would be grandfathered. So if you were specifically concerned about that concern, I would suggest amending the motion to put a time limited, similar to previously, to say, again, this is intended to be a 1 year. It is not intended for staff to then just process zoning compliance permits. So either a more permanent solution is attained, or they would have to find another location, either in the context of unchanged ordinances or new ordinances.
Okay, that
To your question?
yeah, that pushes me a little bit away from wanting to vote for this without that amendment. I'm not sure whether I want to propose that amendment. I'd be interested if anybody else would be interested in entertaining that or not.
Okay. Commissioner Mills?
I didn't nod my head that I was ready to vote, wondering about that amendment. And since we've talked about this right now, I wonder if an amendment that limits it for 1 year, just because we know that floodplain has actually been on, ordinances related to what's allowed in the floodplain has been on our work plan for a while. It's not something that we've gotten around to. I think it's still on the long list, but if we do change something, whether it's next year or the year after, if not, if they would be grandfathered in from a change from that, given that the floodplain issue seems to be the one that's most concerning, I think I would support an amendment to limit this to 1 year.
Okay, I would like to move that then. to limit this to 1 year. I don't know what.
So for
if staff might have advice on how to phrase that.
2017 only.
Yeah, I would suggest we follow the, probably put a December 31st. Home games should be wrapped by then. So if it were not to exceed past December 31st, 2017, that would render that zoning approval null after that date.
Is there support for a second for that motion? Commissioner Woods seconded. Discussion on the proposed amendment to limit this, what do you call it, temporary telecommunications facility to December 31st, 2017. Commissioner Weatherby.
I think that's a good idea. I think, as the petitioner noted, technology changes, and I'm not sure that this is necessarily going to be a big issue 4 years down the road. But I do think it's certainly possible, as we've seen it for the last couple of years, certainly possible that it's going to be an issue for a few years anyway. And if we limit it, then that does, I think, promote the idea that this is not where we want it in the future, and that the floodplain is not particularly a good place for it. I do think, given knowing what I know about the area, it does push it closer to most neighborhoods if we don't use this, or perhaps Pioneer, so, which is not where people are. So I think a 1 year is something I would be happy about.
Any other discussion on the proposed amendment? All in favor of the proposed amendment to limit it to 1 year, please say yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, that's everybody. So now we return to our main motion, which has been limited by 1 year and also limited in terms of the hours of operation to home games, 4 hours before and 2 hours after any home game. Commissioner Briggs, did you have a?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment. I noticed a few members of the audience hoping to maybe be able to speak again. I just wanted to explain our rules real briefly, that just for purposes of fairness, we only allow people from the audience to speak once during the public commentary, and the petitioner is asked to come back up to answer questions. So that's why we don't. So I just want.
I was addressing something he brought up later, which was they're attaching a 20 by 20-foot fence to the cow, which would impede the flow of water during a flood event by much more than the 2 milk crates, you said?
Thank you.
And
If
that's
you can please be
several
seated.
hundred times, and it would wash its way down, and that's something he didn't bring up until after the meeting
Excuse me.
started, and it wasn't
Excuse
in
me.
any of the other.
Excuse me, if you could please yield the microphone.
And I apologize
Commissioner,
for referring to you guys as the city commission. I know it's the.
you should apologize to the city council for that.
And I wouldn't have interrupted, except that he kept that from this entire body until after
Excuse-
he was forced to.
Excuse me,
ask about it and had to admit it that they had done it that way.
excuse me. The commissioner is trying to explain that we have a certain sense of decorum here because although it's a small audience tonight, last week we had 70 or 80 people here, and if we allowed everyone to speak when they wanted to, none of the business of the commission would get done. And we did hear from the petitioner that they intend to fence around the unit, and they intend not to do it to the grade because that's what causes the problem with the floodplain. So
Right,
they're
and it
keeping the
would
fencing
increase
above.
the problem of it washing away because it would no longer be attached to the ground, which
The-
is, when he mentioned the
that-
2 milk crates is all the resistance it would be to the floodwaters.
Excuse-
That was 100
excuse
times
me.
less than what it would actually be as a
Hey.
hydrologist. So, sorry.
You were done, right? Okay. So we're going to take a vote on this. All in favor of the proposed motion as amended, and hopefully everyone recalls what that is, please raise your right hand and say yes. Yes. All opposed?
No.
So that's Commissioner Milstein and Ackerman who voted against. But the motion does carry. So thank you all for your participation this evening.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
So we're going to go from cell facilities to solar facilities. Our next item is the proposed amendment to Chapter 55 for City Council approval. It's amendment to add standards and requirements for ground-based solar systems, solar energy systems located in single or two-family districts or associated with associated with single-family uses in R3 townhouse or R4C multifamily zoning districts. And I think Mr. Kowalski, no.
Yeah, Mr. Kowalski will take, I just wanted to give a quick introduction. I want to make sure that you have a version in front of you that's dated July 18th. It should be a red strike-through version.
Red strikeout version, earlier replaced blue, we did
Yeah.
that back, red. Red's
So-
good, blue's bad.
Mr. Kowalski is going to walk you through the changes that are in this this version being passed out from the version that was in Legistar. From our lens, there are no substantive changes, but after a review of the city attorney's office, a lot of good suggestions were made for some consistency of terminology. So at risk of we'll try to go through them pretty quickly, but I do just want to be clear for the benefit of the audience and for you about what changes are made, and then we can get into the discussion.
Okay, thank you. So again, as Brett just said, we've got the draft ordinance in front of us. These changes were made in the red to the version that you had in Legistar as a result of the attorney feedback. Many of this is strictly clarification. I probably won't read through every single change. There are no substantive changes. The nature of what we were proposing, setbacks, dimensional things, all of that are essentially the same. It's kind of through the first page, you see a number of different things similar to where we had ground-mounted solar was just solar energy systems. Eliminate as defined in this ordinance, things like that. Clarifying it, making it more consistent. And under ancillary solar equipment, adding things that, adding plumbing into there, basically have direct access if you're gonna plumb it for any reason. I'm not sure, depending on what kind of solar, it's solar water heater. Again, near the bottom of the page, strictly changing from collectors to collecting surface. Under personal SES on the next page, on the second page, we did clarify that it does mean a ground-mounted or building-mounted SES solar intercept, so both of those are considered a personal scale SES. And then near the bottom of that subsection, item G is added that says a building-mounted SES shall mean, so we basically then define a building-mounted SES system. Right below that stands for SES, very kind of typo issues there, clarifications on capitalization and such. Again, going towards that, application for zoning compliance permit would be required. Some clarifications in the wording there, capitalization. Next page, ground-mounted SES. Again, eliminating phrases like in all zoning districts because it's kind of goes without saying in that area. Solar energy system, again, changing capitalizations a little bit lower, going down through height, screening. None of that has been changed. All the way at the bottom of the page, on C, building-mounted SES, we just, again, add a clarification paragraph there, basically similar to exactly what was added under the ground-mounted SES, which basically, gives a brief intent kind of statement there. As an intro, that's what was added there, the same, very similar language to what was for ground-mounted. Clarifications on the end, and then basically as the very last subsection D, under ancillary solar equipment, eliminating some of the wording that I don't particularly care for, like to the maximum extent possible, basically saying consistent with this ordinance, because that addresses the screening section of it, and as you guys probably know, we've addressed screening in the previous section of the code. So again, just kind of a really brief background on this. Many of you are familiar with it. We've seen this. Some of you have seen it more than a couple of times. This is a proposal that was a result of a city council directive, basically a moratorium that was passed on this, directed staff, ultimately planning commission, bring forward some standards to address ground-mounted solar SES. What we have now, basically, they've all been treated as accessory structures, all ground-mounted. Mostly I'm referring to ground-mounted here. Building-mounted will continue to be treated in the same way as they have been before. It's subject to the area height placement districts of that standard. That's how we've been processing all of them. I could say probably the vast majority of everyone that we see in the city is a building-mounted. Most people don't even notice them unless you're really seeing them, but those are still treated exactly as the way they were previously. So this proposal, the draft is essentially the same form. I'll go through a couple of the things that were added after our Energy Commission meeting. So back in early, I think it was April or May, actually near the end of May 23rd is when we brought up the earliest version to the ORC committee. We looked over there, we had feedback, which was great, incorporated some of that. And then in June, mid-June, June 13th, to be exact, we held a working session, a joint working session, as all of you or most of you were all in attendance for that with the Energy Commission. That was a very productive meeting as well. So they went through the draft essentially as you see it now, made a couple of helpful changes, but pretty much nothing substantive changes came out of that, except for one of the changes that was advised by planning commissioners was to, previously we had it in R1 and R2 districts. It was brought up by commissioners. I believe Weatherby, who had mentioned that Trudeau as well, you live in R4, but single family houses in R4 districts. So we did add that this does pertain, in R1, R2, as well as single-family uses in the R3 and the R4 districts. I will not read through the code word for word again, since many of us have seen this. But really, that was the feedback. The additional screening we did add, that was also feedback from the Energy Commission as well as Planning Commission regarding the screening and how to screen it. But the language in here, I believe, reflects the majority of the opinion at those commission, which was at the commission meeting, which was kind of screening basically anything that's visible from a public right-of-way. Screening material was debated much at that meeting, but we've kind of have a leave it open for, so we're allowing some creativity. I know through that discussion, we didn't want to necessarily have everybody fence it in with a completely opaque fence. That may look worse than some shrubs. So we kind of leave it a little bit open, that it can be a combination of a berm, hedge, fence, with the caveat that everything does have to comply to our Chapter 104, which is our fencing and screening section of the code. The height is still the same, the placement not within the front yard, but within the, within the front yard, but not the regulated setback area of the front. The rear is still treated the same as now, any accessory structure building. Anything ground mounted in the rear is still subject to, just realized my mic was not on. I hope I was talking loud enough, is subject to the accessory building standards, same as now. 3 feet from the side or rear property line, less than 21 feet in height, which is the exact standards for all of our accessory buildings now, and less than 35% of the required rear open space in the rear yard, and less than 35% of the front open space in the front yard. But again, those were already presented to you at the last ORC meeting, and I believe at this time that kind of summarizes up, and we will kind of open up for discussions and questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kowalski. So I'm going to open the public hearing on this item. If you'd like to address the commission on the proposed amendment to Chapter 55, please come up to the podium, state your name and address for the record. Good evening.
My name is Irma Mayer, M-A-J-E-R. I live at 2809 Brockman Boulevard. I'm here tonight to ask the commission to postpone consideration of these draft zoning regulations for solar energy systems until its meeting in early September. Many residents of the Brockman neighborhood are very concerned that this proposal will allow large ground-mounted installations in front yards of some neighborhoods in the city. Last December and January, residents expressed strong opposition to such installations at meetings of the Commission and City Council. In April, the Council responded to these concerns by imposing the 180-day moratorium on placing such structures in front yards. At that time, we were assured that there was a broad agreement among members of this Commission and City Council that these installations do not belong in front yards. So we were shocked to learn about this draft proposal only 5 days ago. Given this short window, there has been no time to inform residents of our neighborhood or other neighborhoods of the city about the proposed ordinance. And in addition, no information has been available about the Commission's working group meetings, no Commission meeting minutes or videos have been made available online since March. Also, it being summer vacation time, many of the residents and people concerned about this issue are out of town and are not able to consider, the proposal. Residents need more time to discuss and understand this proposed ordinance, especially the consequences for neighborhoods where large solar installations would be allowed in front yards. Such installations, we feel, are inappropriate for our city's residential areas. Please allow time for broader public consideration of this ordinance and postpone this item on your agenda. To do otherwise will risk damaging the strong public consensus that is vitally necessary if Ann Arbor is to move successfully to alternative energy sources. I appreciate this opportunity to address the Commission. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ernesto Figueroa. I live on 2815 Brockman Boulevard. I'm the owner of the house that requested a permit for solar, front yard solar installation. Last year, we obtained a permit that was approved, and later, but we delayed the installation due to this moratorium. I want to make two basic points. The first one is that we care deeply about our neighborhood and about the aesthetics of our neighborhood. We work very hard at making our house, nice and sort of appropriate to the setting. And really, we have no interest in taking away from it. And when we presented our request to put this front yard solar installation, we made it with a proposal to make it essentially neutral to the neighborhood, where it won't be really visible from the street, and won't be an eyesore for the for the neighborhood, for the passerbys. My other point is sort of more generic. As a citizen, as a member of the Union of Concerned Scientists, I consider climate change an urgent matter. And there's been work being done. We've attended meetings on this matter, and we request that, that the work of the commission proceed as scheduled, so that we can move on with this project, which again has no intent in damaging our neighborhood. So I think that's my main point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. My name is Michael Fay. I live at 1531 Packard. I'm not in any immediate way impacted by this. I guess I could say I come here with two hats. I've moved here from California in 1985. I lived in my present residence for 20 years. I, as chance have it, also am an instructor of record for a class at the University of Michigan called Michigan Student Caucus. Twice a year, students go to Lansing and present proposals that they put together. So I'm very much interested in the process of this. And really the only aspect I want to speak to it is it distresses me that this is being considered at a time when so many people are not here. It's usually, in the last 10 years, I would not be here. I'd be on vacations. By coincidence, I'm not here. And it seems to me, I know from talking to my friends, this is a matter of great concern, and it seems that it's something that deserves careful consideration and bringing as many voices of people impacted as possible. Ultimately, it impacts all of us. And I would simply like to reiterate my friend's request that this be postponed until a time when we can involve more people. I think our stakeholders in this process, and get a broader perspective and maybe better inform your decision-making. I also share the gentleman's concerns about environmental issues, and I'm a strong proponent of alternative energy. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else like to address the commission on this item? Okay, seeing no one else, I will close the public hearing and begin by reading the motion, and then we'll have commission discussion. Proposed motion reads, the Ann Arbor City Planning Commission hereby recommends that the mayor and city council approve the amendments to Chapter 55, the addition of Section 5:83 solar energy systems regarding solar panels and related equipment in residential zoning districts. Can I have a commissioner that would move this? Commissioner Weatherby, seconded by Commissioner Milstein. And anyone like to start discussion? Commissioner Ackerman.
Thank you very much. First, I want to thank the patience of the commission as we worked through this. It started with staff putting forward a simple, elegant solution, but one that seemed to be too constraining from the perspective of some of the commissioners that would have prohibited accessory structures in front yards altogether. As we've moved through and tried to narrow our focus on ground-mounted solar, I think that this, we've come to a fairly moderated set of regulations, but a set of regulations that haven't been put in front of those stakeholders who have an interest. I'm torn on this one completely. It's an uncomfortable situation for me to be in. First, as someone who believes we should be doing anything and everything we can to address climate change, but also someone who believes in the character of single-family neighborhoods as part of the culture of Ann Arbor and the fabric of Ann Arbor. Also making it more uncomfortable is that both parties involved, and I won't say sides because everyone has been incredibly respectful throughout this process, but both, stakeholders and parties involved have been so respectful and patient throughout this process, and are my neighbors. So I will eventually move to postpone. I think that this hasn't been put in front of the people that it needs to be put in front of. And the fact that this affects such a small number of lots within the city of Ann Arbor, I think we can do a fairly meaningful and robust engagement on the issue. But I think, and while I understand the constraints of resources they're felt across City Hall, that minutes haven't been produced since March does make me uncomfortable, and that people haven't been able to follow along with the deliberations of this body. But that said, I think we can have discussion tonight, but at some point I will move a postponement.
Yeah, and my apologies on the minutes. Many of them, we were actually planning on including some of those in this packet. Unfortunately, with our power outage at City Hall, we ended up screwing up some files, frankly. But I would also point out much of the discussions with the Ordinance Revisions Committee and working sessions, in fact, we don't draft minutes for. They're not official board sessions, so they wouldn't be for those sessions as well.
I appreciate that. I guess I was thinking of the 2 work sessions for the full body as well as the joint session with the Energy Commission, which were very substantive and have fed this final draft. And again, I don't cast blame on staff. I understand the resources involved in getting minutes out, but at the same time, giving the public access to those records is important.
I'd like to just add a little clarification in addition to that, which is that just for those here, the interested parties, the Planning Commission, we are a recommending body to the City Council. Our job is more on the technical end of ordinance, crafting ordinances that we believe fit the legal and legal constraints and community values that we have here. The City Council is the ultimate folks who will pass this after, whether it passes here today or another date. It still goes to council for multiple readings prior to it being made ordinance. So this is not in any stretch the last step in this process. It's actually one of the early steps in the public process. If this body will think about what Commissioner Ackerman has said and is willing to consider postponement, I would suggest then that our discussion tonight focus on technical issues with the document in front of us rather than on the broader community issues, which, frankly, are really more council purview than ours at the end. So, in other words, do we feel that the draft here answers the issues we had brought up? Do we see anything that hasn't been addressed in the editing? Everything, in a sense, if this body thinks it will postpone, let's make sure that we take care of those issues rather than getting into the more thorny issues of neighborhood dynamics. So, Commissioner Gibb Randall first, and then Commissioner Woods, and then Mills.
I would like
And then
to
Trudeau.
talk about the 80% opacity piece. And I know in some of your other ordinances, it goes into more detail about kind of when that is achieved, because if you're using plant material, that doesn't happen overnight. So I'm just wondering if we need to be able to either refer to another section that covers that more thoroughly, or insert it into here, because you can't just buy an 8-foot evergreen shrub at the nursery and put it in and expect to achieve your ultimate opacity from
They
day
don't have an
one.
opacity rating on those shrubs?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm just trying to think of a way that we can address that so that it either is achieved in a certain number of years, or that it has to meet something at the start, but then can, get there over time. I just feel like it's something we need to be able to address, because there are limitations in terms of what is possible with buying 6-foot shrubs that are going to do what they're going to do, especially during the 4 full season, experience we have with leaves coming off in the winter and, all that stuff, so.
Good point.
Yep, that is a good point. And I remember we had a brief discussion on this, Dior, and I don't think, at least I didn't think that we had solved it completely. That is, it is interesting. I don't have a quick answer, because with most of our other screening requirements, they're all done obviously with solid things that are, you can instantly tell what it is. Whether it's 80% or 50% opaque, we don't have screening requirements for trees, typically like 80%. Some of the thinking was that, if they use a combination of materials, but you don't want to be putting up fence and taking fence down to add in trees. I know our timeline is a little bit harder to enforce at times, because obviously some things make it, some things might not. You have to pull out, replant. It's a good question. I think that what we can do, I think it's a commission, and we all kind of wanted to leave the vegetation, because typically all vegetation exempt from our fencing ordinance anyway. I mean, that doesn't happen. We could leave the fencing requirements in there and encourage vegetation. I don't, again, what does encourage mean in the code, but we could leave up the restriction as an 80% opaque if that's what the commission feels is really what we're after, but we can encourage, the use of vegetation over, I'm thinking as I'm talking, so it's not coming out necessarily. Basically, if we eliminate because you can't get an 80% instant vegetation, you're right. So, but fencing, you can. If we can have wording in there that can encourage the use of vegetation to fill in the gaps over time rather than solid material, there may be something we can go with that and just say, well, we can't measure the opacity of vegetation, so we have to measure it based on any fencing material or solid materials, a berm, something like that you put up. And then in time, if vegetation replaces that, then that meets the coverage, something to that effect.
Don't
It's
we
a
have
good question.
something in parking?
Yeah,
And
well-
there's, I know that there are ways that you can
We
will.
meet conflicting
Well, let
land
me-
use buffers with vegetation, and there are certain standards around that.
Yeah.
Can we lean on any of that language?
Well, here's a benchmark we might compare it to. Within our landscape code, when we are using plant material for screening, the language is that hedging or screening shall be evergreen and/or deciduous shrubs, which shall be a minimum of 24 inches tall in this circumstance, and of a size, quantity, and spacing to achieve 50% year-round opacity at the time of planting,
Yeah.
and then encourages a diversity
Yeah.
of species. So an easy way, in fact, would be to come off 80% and say that we want to do this, or conversely, we could probably replicate that language and say that we would expect, if practical, you know that better than I do, if the intent is to achieve 80% on day one, then this language should probably be replicated with an 80% standard rather than a 50% standard. Or conversely, maybe we benchmark this with the intention that over time we're going to get to an 80% standard. I like the time of planting better than the notion
Yeah.
of having to go back out in
Yes.
some
Yeah.
time certain. to
No, I
measure.
think
That
so
makes more
too,
sense.
and I think that you're never going to achieve 80% with the day one. You just can't find shrubs big enough for the 6-foot thing that you're talking about. And so I think 50% is fine. I would raise your height, because I think you can. I think you could easily come up with 3-foot shrubs, no problem. You might even be able to achieve 4. That's a little, iffy, but you could definitely do 3. And I think if you, with the, there needs to be some language in there that it's going to reach the height that you want it to, because you can't put in shrubs that stay small, It's the dwarf version. So I think that's I think that your other language is getting there. We just may need to tinker with it a little bit to be able to make it address the issue here, which is that we need it to get to be 6 feet. And what we're going for is 80%, but you can start with 50, so I think that we could probably get there with some of the original material that you have and just mess with it a little bit more.
And it's not my intent to craft the language tonight, but to
Right.
identify the issues and an approach, which I believe you have done here.
That sounds good.
Commissioner Woods?
Yeah. My comment was just related, and so it wasn't so much about technical, but I just felt that it was important to also mention that while this issue was coming up and perhaps better notification could have happened or what have you, we do have to realize that the commission has to work year-round, and that it's sometimes is set by when staff has issues ready for us, and we will always do a better job of trying to get everything out there and let people know what we're working on. But indeed, we can't, we're not allowed to really go on vacation as a commission. I mean, I wish we could. But we do have to work year-round, and I just wanted to make sure that the public understood that. So.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, Commissioner Woods. And also I would, although I'm sure I'm sure it's council's intention for the community to get this right. So, but the other thing driving our timing here is that the moratorium instructed the Planning Commission to deliver by a date certain. So we've been doing our best to make sure that from a staff perspective, we're moving efficiently.
And I think the other thing to note is that if a delay may result in the moratorium expiring before there's an ordinance in place, which could allow someone to put up panels without an ordinance and do something that we're trying to guide, but that's the danger. Commissioner Mills.
I have 3 technical questions, clarifications. One is on opacity, so I'll talk about that first. And that is, if, I think we might want to, I was the one who was really pushing for like 80%, just so you can't see it so much, and 80% is the limit in the front yard fencing. Is that correct?
Yes, well, it could depend. If you have a super huge front yard, you may eventually get up higher, but yeah, 80% would be the limit on opacity.
So to require a minimum 80% opacity, but also then you have a maximum 80% opacity, it means you have to have an 80% opacity if you're going to use a fence or a wall, presumably.
Well, yeah, and the vegetation right is exempt from that.
Exactly,
So,
right. So, but
Shannon's
I
point.
think that this actually might lend itself to suggest that if we use 50 because that's achievable with vegetation, then it also doesn't make everybody have to go out and buy the only kind of fence that is 80% opacity.
So are you suggesting that it might be a range from 50 to 80%?
Yes.
Or at least 50%.
At least 50%,
at
because
most
if you want,
80%.
because the fencing ordinance is going to control that there is a maximum if you decide to go fence way. If somebody wants to go 100% opacity on vegetation, like, go, by all means. But yeah, I think if we set the minimum at 50, that gives a little bit of a range if you want to use fencing.
I think this is highlighting why zoning's difficult. So I think I certainly recall, and I think it was logical for us to look for fencing and the opacity requirements as benchmarking when we're looking at that. But on the flip side, I think how we regulate fences along shared property boundaries is conceivably appropriately different than how we would regulate a fence in the middle of the yard, for example. Similarly, in this case, recall that accessory structures can still be in the space, and those could be 100%. Those could be solid walled structures. So I don't think that we necessarily have to conclude that it would have to be 80% because of those intersects. But I think it's a good question. We got to be very clear about to what extent we want to see different levels of flexibility in what circumstances.
Yeah, and in my mind, if there would be the limit, I just don't want to say that you have to have exactly 80% opacity, it could be one interpretation given now. So I'm open to leaving that. In that same section, so we're on, I don't know, B3. 3B3. About screening that's required in the front yard, I want some clarification, this, about what you're not supposed to be able to see from a right-of-way. This says all sides or the rear, which all sides, some might interpret the front as, it depends. Does the front of the panel need to be screened? I didn't interpret it that way, but your presentation made me think like, maybe you are interpreting. No, okay.
Definitely not, just this.
So business side of the panel, like the, business side of the panel you can see from the road. The other three.
The sides, the stone.
Okay, I just want to make sure
But when
that,
it
that's
says
how I
all
read
sides.
this
Yes.
ordinance, but I wanted to make sure that that's,
Yes,
I
that's
didn't get that from
absolutely
your
what-
presentation.
What we intended, okay, well, yes, we absolutely intend that.
Okay, great.
One, I had noted the same thing. It might be that under definitions 2B, a solar collector surface, you might say also refer to as front, which would distinguish it from
And
rear
then
or
those-
sides.
Okay.
Just help tie it together.
And then my other technically question is on the last page, I don't know, 3C1. Did I get that right? It's the setback for the building mounted systems, and that, after that comma, as applicable to placement of SES, is this saying, this was like a loop, what is that saying? In my mind, what it says is, as applicable to placement of SES, the ground-mounted SES, then you couldn't
No.
build a shed in the front yard and put solar panels on it.
Building mounted, wait, I'm sorry, so you're reading right under the building mounted SES section, section 1, correct?
Right, so
Okay, setback.
you had, yeah, I was on board with you, or like, it's what I thought we talked about,
Right.
up until that comma, that you're just following what's allowed for principal building or accessory building standards, right? Like, we just regulate it as we always have, but this, as applicable to placement of SES, led me to believe that maybe you were saying, you can't put the garage, I mean, because this is something that we talked about, right? You can still put a garage in your front yard
Yes,
and put
yes.
solar panels on it, facing the road, or facing away from the road.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm not sure that that final clause is needed.
Yes. Okay, yes, more in reading it in light of what you're saying, and, okay, yeah, we can definitely.
So that's something to look
clarify
at.
that.
That's
I think.
something to look at. And if, I mean, I don't think that at this point we need to reopen the discussion about whether people can build a garage or another building in their front yard and put solar panels on it. Because really what this is about is the ground-mounted section. It's just clarifying on the building-mounted what we already have in place.
Yes, but yes.
Okay.
Thank you,
Thank you.
thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Trudeau.
My point was largely the same as Commissioner Mills' question about the sort of the difference in opacity between what this ordinance says and the fencing ordinance says. It seems, to me, it seems like it's almost a conflict, like we're saying 80% or up in this, and then the fencing ordinance says up to 80%. And so I don't want to have those two combined to just specify that exactly. It seems like our intent is to have some lower threshold with potentially up to 100%.
Up to-
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Since we're kind of moving down the row, I'm going to go next. The one thing I looked at under definitions, A, ancillary solar equipment, that might want to get mentioned, you mentioned batteries, electric meters, converters, plumbing, or water heater tanks, but you don't mention supports. That may be considered, like, well, of course, that's what we mean, but by omitting it, something that's, to me, pretty obvious, seems like maybe that doesn't apply to it.
Support,
Like the support structure for a ground-mounted solar system.
okay,
So, for consideration is all
okay.
I'm, moving down, Commissioner Weatherby, do you have any? Commissioner Milstein? Commissioner Briggs? That takes us back to Commissioner Ackerman. Do you have anything you'd like to bring up?
I suppose a thought more than a
strong stance, but the 3-foot setback from adjoining property lines, and we went with 6 feet, which is in line with our fence ordinance, but would allow up to 100% opacity. And at 6 feet, 3 feet from a property line, where could a fence be in terms of opacity and height?
Well, it depends. So fences can be right on the property line. But it depends on that front, not so much a distance from the property line, but the distance from the right-of-way is what determines the opacity of the fence and the maximum height. So, so fences, right, can run all along the property line, but as it goes at a distance from the front, so that's where the opacity, 25 feet from the front property line, it can only be 4 feet, 50% opaque. Then it goes on to be 6 feet and 80% opaque, and then typically in the rear yard, it's 8 feet and 100% opaque. So the 3 feet doesn't really have a direct effect on the opacity, depending on where it's placed. And the 3 feet, again, the basis for that, the way that structure would be placed, because that's the same as what our accessory building structure standards are now.
Understood. Okay. I think I'm good. Has everyone had a chance to comment who wanted to?
Everyone has.
All right. I'm gonna move a postponement to our second meeting in August. 6 weeks is a bit out of precedent in terms of postponement for, I guess I haven't been on this body very long, but certainly at city council. That gets us to the end of the summer. It also keeps us well within the second meeting in October, which is the 180-day moratorium, as well as would keep any potential construction an opportunity for this calendar year. So I'd move a postponement to the second meeting in August.
Is there
To resolve these technical issues.
second for that motion? Commissioner Milstein? Okay. Discussion about postponement, any commission discussion? All in favor of the motion to postpone, please say yes.
Yes.
Yes, I think that's everybody. Any opposed? I didn't hear anyone. Okay. So that motion carries. That means we are postponed. And then you'll be sure to relay to council that
I will be.
council asked us to do this quickly and then asked us to postpone.
I don't even have to read between the lines there.
Commissioner Klein?
I have a flair for the obvious.
Commissioner Klein?
Yes.
Just to comment that for those in the audience, then you will want to make sure you leave your email address up here if you came up and spoke, or if you know of others who will need to be notified, you'll want to let planning services know that so that they can know that we're going to, that the issue's coming up again, and also to have the opportunity to look at the material that's available on e-tracket or wherever.
Thank you, Commissioner Woods. So that ends our, this item, the work on the proposed amendment to Chapter 55. And our next item, 10B, is called our organizational meeting. Annually, we need to vote on our, I think, accept our bylaws, vote on our work program, and election of officers. And our planning manager has organized all this for us and is going to lead us through this process. I don't believe there's a public hearing associated with this.
There is not.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Chair Klein. I think a lot of this should be relatively familiar for you. A lot of it was originated in our retreat, and then we refined some of it in a working session, along with some notes of that retreat that was included as well. And as indicated, the bylaws require a couple of regular organizational activities to occur. You've already taken action on one of those, which is the annual master plan certification, that the master planning documents are still the documents of importance to the community. So what you have here are the sort of remaining actions from an organizational perspective, and I'm just going to go through them in order. The first one is the proposed approval of the fiscal year 17-18 Planning Commission work program. And so this is a two tables on the page that is cleverly titled the same. It identifies master planning study priorities at the top and ordinance revisions implementation actions at the bottom. It also has a list of potential future projects. I think these are projects that a couple of, or at least one of which was referenced this evening, things that have been identified as potential, but they haven't sort of risen to a level of putting resources in a prioritized way to them. So based on our retreat conversation and the subsequent conversation at the work session, I think I have accurately, I hope I've accurately reflected your priorities from a master planning perspective and ordinance revisions. While we didn't specifically go into that priority column, I did my best to sort of articulate what I thought from a high and low priority perspective some of these items would be. And I guess ultimately would appreciate any thoughts or updates you have, and if we're ready, adoption of this work plan. And then after this, it would also be forwarded on to City Council to share with them the work plan that you've adopted as well.
Okay, so I think in this case, I read the motion. We'll first and second it, and then if there is any discussion. So the first motion reads, the Ann Arbor City Planning Commission hereby approves of the fiscal year 17-18 Planning Commission work program as presented. And that is moved by Commissioner Milstein, seconded by Commissioner Weatherby. And is that a question or is that a late second?
No, it's a question.
Okay.
Sorry.
Commissioner Mills, question or discussion, that is, I was going to say.
This is, I think that this all reflects what we discussed. So from my perspective, I have no beef with the prioritization, what's on the list. I just wonder on the ordinance revisions actions that there are two low priority items that the time frame has passed. And so I don't know if that was, because I know that they've carried over. And so I don't know if we want to update those.
Yeah, well, if we still want to take them on, I think we should. I apologize, I should have at least taken a stab at updating those. As it relates to the edge properties, I can tell you we haven't done a lot of substantive work since I've been here on those. I know that was sort of on a laundry list of activities that we've done a pretty good job in checking a lot of those tasks off. Maybe just for the sake of, if there are low priorities, we target completion by June 30th of 2018, like for the end of this work plan. We're going to come back next year and revisit it, so maybe we could do that. As it relates to the R4C, R2A amendments, I think that's more of a recognition that I think that's a big process, and I am frankly a little fearful about promising you something.
We've got a time frame blank on the upper section. Should we just take a time frame out?
We could, or we could put one in, or we could put it on the potential for future projects list.
I think if we've got my perception is if we've got a planner, we did identify it as something that we ought to take. If we've got a planner who has capacity to take on a project to get us started.
I think in that particular issue, it's more than just having someone having time. This is a major community issue, and I think they may have to get balanced a little bit with a couple of these other things, in my take on it. Otherwise, we probably would have jumped on it, and I'm not sure that there's even support on council for pushing this forward at this point. Other thoughts?
So maybe leave it blank. So it'll still be recognized as sort of a upper, higher priority potential future project, if you will.
Yes, I think that that's a great way.
It's high on the list of things we might think about doing.
Someday in the distant future.
All right, so June 2018 for the edge properties discussion and blank for the R4C, R2A.
Right. And I would suggest on the edge properties that maybe we look this fall for either a work session or a ORC meeting when we can get refreshed on the property. I mean, it's a handful of properties is my recollection, about a half a dozen properties. And that, at least we can see what that would involve, and I think that also would end up having some farther-reaching implications in terms of those property owners and neighborhoods. And so I don't want to wade into that without recalling what that, all the implications of that. But there we do have a planner assigned.
Yes, who's also busy doing the TOD.
Right.
And Zorro.
And Zorro.
Also,
Which are higher.
just a question about the R4C, R2A. It also indicates that we're going to have a consultant eventually, CBD, so do we have the funding for that?
So the city has budgeted a, sort of a planning budget for the next 2 years.
Okay.
However, that is going to be shared amongst master planning efforts, transportation planning efforts, and a wide variety of things. I guess, so it's possible. I think putting consultant there probably is more of a recognition on my part that I just think that that's a pretty large initiative that we're probably going to need some assistance.
Commissioner Weatherby.
And just to comment on the R4C, R2A, which is sort of near and dear to my several years spent dealing with it, is by not taking action, we are taking action. And just to acknowledge that things are happening in the R4C and R2A areas, and are actually happening at a somewhat higher clip now. And so by not taking action, we are de facto taking action on that. And just to kind of put that out there, that we are committing to not addressing it, which is not only allowing, but also, I think some of the properties in those areas are coming forward now with proposals because they know this is coming or potentially coming, and they're trying to get things in before it does. So I'm just going to say that it is an action that we are taking by not addressing it.
And I would just say, I think, I don't think this is the commission shirking responsibility, but looking at the priorities given to us and trying to rank them to the best of our abilities. Other discussion about the work plan? Questions? Okay. All in favor of the work plan as amended? Please say yes. Yes? Any opposed? Okay, that passes. So do you want to talk about committee assignments?
Sure. The next is just that, committee assignments. Again, my apologies. I think the first version of this that was in your packet erroneously had Commissioner Briggs on the Ordinance Revisions Committee. That would have made too many members of that committee. So we had previously discussed removing her from that, and I had just sent an old version of it. So the version that you have, hopefully dated draft July 18th of 2017, is the correct one. It identifies Planning Commission reps to the Affordable Housing Subcommittee Master Plan Review Committee, which, based on what we just did, is going to be meeting soon, the Ordinance Revisions Committee and the Executive Committee, and then Commissioner Gibb Randall has agreed to be the Planning Commission representative to the Environmental Commission, which is a spot that we were attempting to fill, so thank you very much. And hoping for the Planning Commission's endorsement of this.
So I'll read the motion again. The Ann Arbor City Planning Commission hereby approves the fiscal year 17-18 Planning Commission committees assignments as presented, including elimination of the capital improvements and citizen outreach committees. Commissioner Milstein moved, and seconded by Commissioner Mills. Questions and discussion. I will just say at our retreat, just a reminder, we talked about the capital improvements because it's now been so well organized by Deb Goslin that she would just present it to the commission as a whole at a work session as opposed to as a subcommittee. And then I think we also felt that the Citizen Outreach Committee had run its course in terms of getting the citizen participation ordinance up and running and getting some feedback on that. But that was my recollection, if others recall differently. Any other questions or discussions on this? Okay, all in favor? Yes?
Yes.
Any opposed? Okay.
Okay,
That's
next
2
up,
and 2.
the third, your adopted planning commission bylaws require that annually at the first meeting in July, my apologies, this is the second, that the current bylaws are reviewed and take action to either maintain them or make necessary amendments. We are proposing that you confirm that the bylaws as written are appropriate. We've also checked in with the attorney's office to see if they see any warranted changes based on any legislative changes, and they do not recommend any changes.
Okay. And I've got another motion, which is the Ann Arbor City Planning Commission hereby maintains the bylaws as written. Commissioner Mills and Commissioner Gibb Randall seconded that. Any discussion on bylaws? Does anyone have any burning bylaw questions? No. Faked me out there for a second. All in favor of maintaining the use of our bylaws, please say yes.
Yes.
Yes, that's everybody.
With your indulgence, I'd like to add one surprise organizational to it. Typically, we have supported attendance of planning commissioner at the planning conference in the past. Last year, Commissioner Trudeau was able to attend. I just said he could go, and I've learned since then that it's more conventional for you to, as a board, approve attendance of a commissioner at the planning commission. Commissioner Weatherby, another new commissioner relatively new to the planning commission, has expressed interest in attending the planning conference this year, and so I told her that I would ask for your consideration of approving that to send her.
So I have, where's is the MAP conference?
It's the MAP conference, yeah.
And where is it this year?
It's on Mackinac Island.
Oh.
But at Mission Point, not at the Grand. So, yeah. It's
And it's in October again?
It's
or-
in the parking lot at. Yeah.
September?
Yes, late September, or October. I don't know the exact dates. But again, if others are interested, then we can certainly consider that. So, but I think realistically, that's why the planning commission considers it. From my lens, from Commissioner Weatherby's service on the planning commission, and now she's also the rep to the zoning board of appeals. I think she's had some conversation with Scott about his experience with the citizen planner program and some of the other aspects of the conference. So it seems worthwhile to me, but I don't want anybody else to get mad at me.
So usually we make there's a motion that to approve Commissioner Weatherby attending the MAP conference, and I will make that motion if I am allowed as chair in this instance, in a second for Commissioner Milstein.
There is a conflict of interest here.
That's true. All in favor, please say yes.
Yes.
I think that's,
I think it is also customary for that commissioner to do a presentation to the planning commission, though, about what they learned, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
they usually do come back and share that.
Oh, sorry. PowerPoint.
But I'm happy,
60
I'm happy.
seconds.
And it usually, if I recall, it usually involves a selection of fudge
Yeah.
for the commissioners. We didn't do item C as we went through
Oh,
this.
yeah. I'm sorry. I skipped over that, didn't I? Yeah, we should do item C. The next organizational item, for which I have not crafted a motion for you, is the designation of officers for the Planning Commission. The officer positions for the Planning Commission are chair, vice chair, and secretary. As you likely know, the chair is currently Ken, vice chair is Alex, and secretary is Sarah. The bylaws prohibit serving in those positions for more than a 2-year consecutive term. They are all in their first year of these terms, based on my research. To my knowledge, they are all willing to continue to serve. However, any commissioner can be nominated, of course, and if things get more controversial, I got the secret ballots. But ultimately, we'd be looking for a nomination of slate of officers and action on that.
Commissioner Ackerman.
I would move the slate of officers as is for 4 more years.
I don't think that term is allowed, actually. I think it's a single year.
1 more year, until July of next year.
Is there a second for that? Commissioner Trudeau? Discussion about that? Any?
I think you guys are doing a great job.
We have
Oh, sorry.
good staff.
I think you guys are doing a good job. Just wanted to make it formal. Just wanted to make sure you called
Th-
it.
Thank you on behalf of the executive officers. So if there's no other nominations, just making sure. All in favor of the slate as proposed? Oh,
Technically, you should not be the one
Oh,
running
you're right.
that, but,
You're right, I should
but
not.
that's okay. We can let Brett do it.
Brett should do that. You're correct. Thank you.
Yeah.
Zackerman moved and Commissioner Trudeau supported. All those in favor for 1 more year of the current slate, raise your hand and say aye.
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 All those that say the planning manager should get a raise. Carries unanimously.
Nice
All right.
try.
Lastly, while I don't need action, Commissioner Mills and Woods are already lightning fast and have filled out the annual disclosure of employer and organizational affiliations. If you aren't able to fill it out tonight, please return it to me at the next meeting or when you can. This is just to make sure that we are aware of any potential conflict of interest moving forward.
It's in our packet.
Is it in our packet?
I don't think it is. I think we just handed it out to you.
Oh,
You
okay.
can
I
ask.
don't know that I have that.
If you need a copy, I can also email it out to you, so.
Do you have an extra?
I've got an extra.
I need one as well.
Shannon, I need
I'll go ahead and
There it
send
is.
an email out.
I got it.
You can return it at OG.
So that concludes item 10B, I believe.
Yes.
Takes us to audience participation. I do not see any members in attendance at this time, so we're going to pass over that. Item 12 is any commission proposed business. I think technically that's usually when we do the motion about the conference, but that's all right.
Sorry.
We got ahead of ourselves. Is there any other commission proposed business, Commissioners? Doesn't look like any. I will then entertain a motion for adjournment. Commissioner Milstein, seconded by Commissioner Weatherby. All in favor, say yes.
Yes.
Yes. We are adjourned.